Hello everyone! Today we're gonna react to the entirety of the 2.0 Five Nights at Wario saga.
I mean, we already were pet, but you know.
Hi guys!
First of all,
Uh,
we spent over few minutes trying to get through this crap. It's working fine.
To
Shut
your
up.
ass!
I know.
What? I eat a lot of garlic.
I know you eat a lot of
Garlic.
garlic.
These
With the
two,
way you
I don't
crouch.
even know.
I'm sorry. I can't take you seriously with Wario's face, like the eyes. It just.
Yeah, I mean...
Okay, enough rambling. Let's get this going.
Alright, let's do this.
I mean, it's already going, man. Oh wait, it's already back at the beginning.
Alright, you're
Damn.
supposed to sit down.
Okay.
Little guy, sit in your chair.
Okay. I don't know what they do, but okay.
There you go. I also can't sit because my chest goes through the chair, so don't ask me to sit.
Okay. Let's do this.
Chapter 1. Introduction.
Years ago, I watched a video from Markiplier, a YouTuber I checked in on from time to time whenever I wanted an entertaining horror game let's play. One video caught my interest, and obviously the interest of many others, especially when the title was Warning, Scariest Game in Years. Five Nights at Freddy's became a cultural phenomenon, and who could have foreseen what would grow out of this one indie game? One thing I noticed was that there were several elements that looked familiar in this game. Stuff like fading transitions between scenes would freeze any ongoing animations, etc. And all of this was stuff I was familiar with from ClickTeam Fusion, the game developer software I had been using and playing around with for years. So I started to put the pieces together and got the idea that this amazing game was made with the same software I was using. That's when I started to play around with ClickTeam in new ways, seeing if I could make something similar to Five Nights at Freddy's. And from there, just for fun, I thought I'd turn it into a full game, just for a test, featuring the character in my username, Wario. And the rest is history. I'm one who loves writing stories. How good I am at writing is another question, but I've always loved writing, and so I used this opportunity to make a branching parallel story, you could say, to Five Nights at Freddy's, with elements that were similar in the basics, but took its very own turn as time went on. I naturally started to get certain thoughts along the way, such as how silly it really was to put so much thought into a dark, complex story in a fan game featuring Super Mario characters. But I've picked up a mindset over time, where I think anything in a story can be embraced and given a reason to exist and being the way it is. Is something seemingly stupid, silly, nonsensical? Then give it a reason for being that way. Maybe it can enhance the story in ways you didn't think about before. Not everything even has to make sense as long as it gives the player an experience and a reaction of something. That is why you can love instrumental music, for example, without having any lyrics or story attached to it whatsoever. And that is also true for Five Nights at Wario's. As silly as the idea of all it sounds, I tried, as time went on, to give it a reason for being exactly the way it is, which actually turned out to be one of the most important factors of this entire story in the end. But in a way that hasn't been directly explained, until now. Here, I intend to explain the entire plot of my Five Nights at Wario series, a game series consisting of 6 games in total. There's a lot going on in this story, so if you have played through all the games, it'll be easier to follow. There may be certain details I exclude, and if so, the reason for it is because I don't find it important enough to mention, or that the details are already in the game in one form or another, or that I simply want to leave it up for you to find out or interpret on your own. That being said, I want to explain as much as I can, but be warned, once I tell you, I cannot untell you. That is not to say that this is a marvelous, fantastically written story, or even a good story as a whole.
MCU.
But rather that certain things, being kept in the dark is an actual part of the plot and the experience of the games. Imagination plays a big part in certain stories, and revealing answers narrows down that imagination. So if you want to keep it that way, you can always click away. But if not, grab something good to eat and drink. Sit back.
Lucky enough, I actually
And let me
have
tell
my
you about
game
this
with me.
story I've tried to write over the years. One I've had so much fun with. This will be a very long one. My longest video ever made, in fact.
You know, I do like how
Whether or not the
Office has,
universe
like,
of
an
Five
iMac.
Nights at Wario's will continue or not in the future is hard to say at the moment of writing this. But the actual game series of Five Nights at Wario's has come to a fitting end. And so I found it fitting to conclude that with this video. Try to keep up, because at the very end, a lot of things may just click into place for you. Let us begin.
Before we resume, I gotta turn up people's volumes 1 sec. Okay, let's go.
Alright. Chapter 2.
No, I do the chapter 9. Chapter 2,
Alright.
Greed.
Yep, that's basically you.
This is a world, seemingly realistic, although with people and creatures in all shapes and forms. Many of these characters are ones we know about, Super Mario and all that which accompanies him in his journeys. In this world, however, they are not quite the same as we know them. They are not the goofy, funny stereotypes we've grown to love, but rather flesh and blood people with desires and dreams and lives of their own.
Brawl rendered.
This story is not about Mario, however, but his more greedy counterpart.
It's pretty rare not to
Wario,
see Brawl
and
Mario
how
actually
his
smile.
greed took him and many others down a dark path. The year is 1988. Wario and his friend Waluigi, a loyal yet nitpicky and semi-greedy man, had just opened up Wario's, a small diner/cafe where they sold a special type of hamburger that Wario himself had created. This secret recipe he used gave the burgers a unique, sweet, multi-flavored taste. Wario himself decided to sit guard at the first night of the week to make sure his own creation stayed safe. He couldn't take the risk of leaving it alone in the dark. This secret recipe started to attract customers from everywhere, and the rumor of an insanely delicious and cheap hamburger was spreading like wildfire. It's safe to say that the two men made a profit grander than they could ever imagine. Years and years of solid income, and the two proud owners started to plan out the next big step in their business. A factory, one that can mass-produce their unique product, as well as potential new products of the same quality. Enter 2004, 16 years later, and Wario's fast food factory is standing tall and ready, majestic and powerful in sturdy brown bricks. Wario had bought a piece of land that was very central, very big, and yet it had remained unpurchased for as long as he could remember. Strange, he thought. So naturally, this was the perfect spot to build his factory, and it didn't take long until he got the approval to do so. In this world, the people we know as Mario and Luigi exist as normal people as well. Italian men dedicated to hard work. Here, the four people and Mario's current wife, Peach Toadstool, were all close friends, and so, when the factory needed more manpower to keep up with the factory's huge production, the two Mario brothers and Toadstool were all hired with exceptionally good payment. Production was going very well, and sales were skyrocketing. For a
Wow.
while, that was.
See, I'm a good person.
As time
It's
passed,
like the same sales as
the
when
sales
the
were
Switch
starting
got,
to
like,
drop.
blown up.
Slowly, but surely. The interest in Wario's hamburger that were sold around various stores were fading away, and Wario, being a man who was attracted to the concept of wealth through money, was naturally starting to feel the panic creeping up his back, ready to attack on the day they would no longer make a profit big enough to sustain the factory production. So what did he do? It was something he, nor anyone else, could have foreseen.
You watching this, little
At the
bean?
end of a cold day at work,
Yes.
Wario was closing the factory and was about to head home for the day,
It's like I'm
when he
listening to an
noticed something
audiobook.
he had never noticed before.
Well, there's
That
some parts
is
we
actually
have
In the
to watch.
dirt, barely sticking out of the ground next to one of the factory walls,
And by
was an
audiobook,
object
I mean that in a
seemed
good
to
way.
resemble a book. It naturally caught Wario's attention. Had this been here all the time?
Yeah, we've
Or
been
had
through
someone
this already.
placed it there recently? Either way, he went over to pick it up. It was stuck in the ground and he had to pull it out with lots of force. Shocked over what he was looking at, he could not stop staring at this old, smelly, worn-down book he was holding in his hands. Strange symbols of horns, teeth and other drawings he couldn't interpret filled the cover. But there was no text on the cover. And so he opened it up and started to skim through it. In here he saw drawings and ancient writings that, surprisingly, still used a similar language as the one they used in the present day. The book could only be interpreted as a witch book, or a ritual book, seemingly from centuries ago. Wario was skeptical and felt
A cursed
uneasy
book?
how a book like this could end up in his property.
It's an
That
Necronomicon
was
from
until
Evil
he came
Dead.
across what seemed to be a
Oh.
type of
Well,
wish-granting
something
ritual,
like that.
accompanied by a drawing. The drawing caught Wario's attention and turned his fear into deep lust. The drawing showed several people dancing around a pile of money, food, gold, diamonds, crystals, weapons. It could all be Wario's. He could have it all in his own hands. All that was required was a sacrifice of the people closest to him. Although it mentioned nothing about what the sacrifice meant in detail. What should he do? Let the factory, his life's work, be destroyed, leaving him and his friends unemployed and ruined? Or could he just say a few words and get whatever riches he wanted? Was it a selfish or selfless action? According to himself, it had to be selfless, right? He couldn't even begin to admit to himself that he may just have done something cruel to the people closest to him, just for wealth. Because he did go through with it. Deep down in the factory's underground corridors, in a small room in the very depths of the cellar, he went through with a ritual. A ritual spell was activated. He could feel it, an uneasy feeling, lingering in the air as he went home.
Is there any chances that someone who would actually collaborate with Wario would make an animated series of this?
Who knows? Chapter 3. Karma.
Karma. Oh,
He didn't tell them a thing. But it was okay, wasn't it? It would save the company, it would save their jobs. It would make him richer than ever. And lo and behold, the next day, they got a report that sales had started to skyrocket once again. Mario,
Shit.
Luigi, Waluigi, and Peach Toadstool all questioned what had happened, of course, but all Wario could give them was an shoulder-rising, I don't know look. But no one questioned it any further, because from that day on, things were going better than ever. Only Wario himself knew that something sinister might be behind the sudden increase in profit. But how could he know for sure? How could he know the ritual was real? Or if this was all just a coincidence? He couldn't. So the thought of the book slipped more and more into the back of his mind, taking up less and less space in his head. He felt comfortable that his friends didn't know about the potential reason behind what has happened. But he was wrong. He was not the only one who knew. Wario had hidden the book away in the deep basement of the factory, hoping no one would ever find it. But someone had watched him take the book downstairs. Luigi was observing Wario carrying this mysterious artifact downstairs the day he activated the ritual. And so, one day, when no one was around to see him, Luigi decided to sneak down into the depths below, through the underground corridors of the factory, to see what he was hiding down there. Here he found the book, and he read through it. Shocked and fearful, he started to get an idea of what might have happened. But due to his good heart and careful nature, he said nothing to anyone, and continued on as if he knew nothing. And he treated Wario just like before, like a friend whom he trusted. And he could not know for sure exactly what Wario had done. In 2007, everything changed, and a massive chain of events were about to unfold. The quiet before the storm was coming to an end, when a man named Bruno Gates broke into the fast food factory one cold evening to steal the secret recipe used in the hamburgers. His motivation for the break-in? All we know at this point is the lust for money through the value of the recipe. He put on a big mascot costume he found in the factory, a costume known as Wario Man, in order to sneak around while staying anonymous. What he didn't know, however, was that Wario himself was present in the factory as well. And before he could locate the recipe, he suddenly found himself face to face with Wario himself in a corridor. Bruno wished to stay safe, but he didn't have the intent of murder. But still, in blind panic and desperation, Bruno Gates plunged a knife into Wario, killing him as his body fell backwards down a staircase, knocking out several teeth from the dying body in the process. Bruno felt a rush of adrenaline like never before. He just took someone's life. He couldn't fully process it, and thus all he could feel was a sense of satisfaction. He felt powerful, unstoppable, and closer to his goal. A door down the corridor opened up,
So
and the sound of the metallic
this guy is
rust
basically just,
screeched down the
going
hallway.
after it.
As it turned out, all 5 workers were present in the factory, something not foreseen by Mr. Gates, considering the time of day. There was only one thing he could do.
Mario's expression.
One by one, they got slaughtered.
This guy gets slaughtered.
There could be no witnesses.
I never actually see Mario draw Mario with different
had to
expressions.
remain
though, even though despite he's
anonymous
been
and
so
safe.
pissed off in the game.
The last
Yes,
one
because
standing
Mario's not supposed to have
Luigi.
expression.
But he did not run away, nor did he panic. He was simply in shock over what had happened in front of him, before a sudden wave of acceptance rushed over him. Lost in thought, he walked up to Bruno. Still lost in all of the things he had to take in, he finally looked up into his face, directly into Bruno's eyes, and almost whispered, "I know what he did." Bruno got a brief moment where he snapped out of his delirious rage and looked genuinely confused.
Why does he look like the...
Luigi continued with, "Do it,"
No, I meant the Luigi's
pointed
design
to a rope
shot. It looks like
hanging above them.
the press Luigi from the
Luigi
Mansion
knew.
beta trailer.
Not in detail, not in the specifics, but he knew Wario did something with that book. And so, he let himself get killed, in the hope that whatever Wario did, it would be broken or cancelled if all of their lives were taken away. And since he was the only one left, with his friends laying dead in front of him on the floor, he accepted his death with open arms, all for the sake of the greater good.
Oh, fuck.
Everything was quiet once more. Bruno, standing with the blood-dripping knife in his hand, was trying to process the events that had just unfolded. But he resisted the thoughts storming into his mind. He pushed them aside. He could not deal with this now. For now, he had to find the recipe before it was too late. And there it was. Finally. Locked away in Wario's office, a classified envelope was hidden away. While he admired his discovery and was about to head for the exit, something else was going on. Luigi was wrong. His selfless intention did not lead to the result he thought. In fact, the opposite was true. The curse Wario had put upon himself and his friends got activated first now, after their physical bodies turned lifeless. The book, hidden deep within the underground tunnels of Wario's factory, started to move, shake, twist and turn. The pages were being torn apart, flapping and flying across the room like a twister or a tornado was raging inside the room. Then, it all went silent, before what looked like 6 purple puffs of smoke blew out of the book, one being quite larger than the rest.
Spirits.
On the main floor, the bodies of the 5 workers were still in the hallway. Their spirits, on the other hand, had not left to an eternal resting place. This was part of the deal, part of the pact, part of the ritual Wario went through with earlier on. The 5 seemingly invisible, glowing purple energy clouds floated in, towards the bodies, towards the lingering, confused spirits of the 5 workers. And as the curse itself attached itself to them, their souls got corrupt, hateful, rageful and vengeful. They were not gone yet, after all. Not yet. Bruno was walking fast. He wanted to get out and, once outside, get out of this massive costume. But he never got that far. Meeting him in a hallway were the victims of his crime, back alive, standing up. Only something was clearly wrong, off. He froze on the spot, confused and terrified. But that was all he managed to do. He couldn't even think, before the zombie-like corpse of Wario dashed forward and killed Bruno Gates on the spot, leaving him dead on the floor, trapped inside his costume. Hell had been unleashed.
Ouch.
A curse which was only the beginning had taken root in the spirits of the 5 factory workers. They did not hesitate. They turned around and walked out. The parasite that was attached to them kept them from feeling anything. Not any satisfaction, not any human emotion, not anything. All they felt was a lust for revenge. The curse had an effect of numbing everything else and embracing chaos instead. What was this spell? Where did this energy, this curse come from? Does it have a reason for being here, for existing in the first place? All we know is that Wario's lifelong dream had become a nightmare for many others than himself, trapped in his dead body, while his inmost core was transformed into a monster.
And so this is how it begins.
Chapter 4. Christopher Peterson.
Christopher.
as these terrible events were unfolding in a factory,
Christopher.
nobody around was actually aware of them. But someone was paying close attention, observing that not everything was as it should be. A man in his 40s named Christopher Peterson was a quiet, observant man and a brilliant scientist. He was high up in the food chain, so to speak, in the world of science, and currently worked for a very secretive company, and only the fewest of the few knew the company even existed. Christopher was studying the big questions, the fundamental questions of reality. Time, space, the human body, nuclear physics, as well as very secretive research. But his favorite topic and his area of expertise was time. For long he had slowly but surely been experimenting with the idea of time travel and how time is structured. Few people had progressed this far in this field, except for Christopher Peterson. His wife was another persona we know from before, but similar to the others we know, this alternate world only shares some similarities with her origin.
I knew it.
Rosalina, normally known in video games as a cosmic queen of sorts, is here merely a person, a normal woman, as far as we know, that is. She could feel Christopher starting to feel uneasy. She knew that he knew that something terrible had happened. Then he saw them, the dead, yet the walking, out in the dark corners of the street. He observed Wario and the others, as shivers went down his spine, as if his body was telling him that this was something nobody had seen before and nobody should approach. And so, Christopher's workflow picked up speed. He had to prepare. What he had seen, he knew there was great evil behind it. He could sense it the day he saw them. And thus, he rushed to complete an experiment that so far had only been a theory in his mind. A time machine. A machine to move matter and perhaps even non-physical energies through time. Even though his dedicated research had reached a lot further than anyone else's, his knowledge was still not absolute of the structure of time. He told his wife about what he saw, and he told her about his plan. If there was any good time to test his time machine, it was now. He gave Rosalina the instructions needed, hugged her goodbye, and entered his own creation, promising that they one day would meet again. He pressed the button, and within 5 seconds, Christopher was sent far, far away, to another age centuries away from our own. Rosalina was left there, alone, but with the strong courage to stay dedicated, remembering what she had to do, remembering what Christopher had told her. And so she started her search for the 5 possessed bodies wandering around the streets outside. Eventually she found them, met them face to face. They stared each other down, but not for long. The frozen moment that felt like an eternity was broken in a few seconds, as the corpse of Wario moved towards her in aggressive manners. Rosalina reacted immediately, pulling out the device Christopher had left for her. This device was a form of powerful electrical rod. The 5 cursed ones stopped, as if they had hit an invisible wall, and slowly but surely, their bodies collapsed onto the floor, leaving nothing but bright purple energies floating above them, which slowly got absorbed towards the tip of Rosalina's rod. A flash of white lit up the entire back alley, and everything was quiet. The air whistled a gentle breeze. Rosalina was on the ground, knocked back by the immense energy, as she was breathing out in relief and anxiety, the bodies were laying lifeless in front of her. If everything went according to her plan, the cursed spirits were sent through time itself, backwards, to before whatever cursed them managed to get hold of them. In a state of hurry and panic, this is all Christopher and Rosalina could think of and plan out. But did it work? Were they all saved? Were the events reversed and undone? The results were not quite as planned.
I knew it.
Something had gone horribly wrong. Somehow, Rosalina felt weaker. She felt strange. She did not know if this was due to the immense energy blast that had knocked her over, or if something else was happening. Somehow she felt drained, limited, almost cut in half.
Shit.
Damn.
Chapter 5, Cracked Mirror. You know, I would have preferred
Cracked
Shattered
Mirror.
Glass, but whatever.
Christopher had
Mjawar.
misjudged, and misunderstood. He missed the mark. He did not realize that time is fragile. The mysterious rod Rosalina used was crafted in a hurry by Christopher. It was not as stable as he had hoped, and it consumed far more energy to send the cursed spirits back in time. In fact, the energy blast was so strong, time itself cracked in two. It cracked like a
Nice
mirror,
editing.
splitting into multiple pieces, where it will show the same grand image, but certain parts look different. Time split in two. Like a rock cutting a river in two, it formed two branching paths. But in the end, they will naturally form back together, combining back into one. The soul of every living person was split in two, living in two different alternate realities next to each other, that one day would combine back together as the timelines eventually would start merging in a distant future. The timeline of this world had been ripped apart and split in two. Keeping this in mind is very important going forward with our story. To understand what it means when the first and second timeline is mentioned. The first timeline was the one where everything up until now had happened, and the second timeline is the one that was now created. The world was still one composite whole, only split in the middle for a while. This means Rosalina's and Christopher's plan was to send their spirits back to 1988, the year of Wario's cafe. And it kind of happened, but not in the way she foresaw it. This second and new timeline had now been created. And this new parallel flow of time is where the spirits of the future ended up. They were floating there, hovering around, without being attached to any physical bodies. And as neither Christopher nor Rosalina foresaw, the curse was still attached to these lost souls. In this new timeline, the spirits of Wario and the others were now, in other words, living in two different places at once. Half of them in their respectful bodies, while the other half came from the first timeline and were now floating around, cursed in this newly established Wario's cafe. It was once again the first week of the cafe's life. Wario was once again sitting night guard during the first nights of the week. And something was off this time. He thought he could see shadowy figures from time to time on the camera monitor. But whenever he went to check, nobody was there. He thought he was imagining things, until he got a call next day from a person known as Winslow.
Who's this actor?
Wario, my good man! Do you hear me clearly? I sure hope so, man. You weren't at work today, so I just had to call you to tell you
Oh, that's Master
something
Max.
crazy
Correct.
went down today. So I had lunch break, relaxing
Fucking
and goofing
crazy.
around with the camera system, you know, and I saw you. You with wide glowing eyes and a deformed face. You were just standing there by the back door, so I naturally went to check if it was you, but no, you were nowhere to be seen when I got there. No one else there believed me, but that looked like a freaking demon to me, man.
Despite what Winslow reported, Wario stayed. And lo and behold, he saw himself, as well as his friends, roaming the hallways on the camera monitor. These strange apparitions interfered with the camera systems, the electronics, everything. Wario had no idea what was happening, and few people believed his stories, except for Winslow and Waluigi. It didn't take long until the paranormal hauntings got so strong they had no other choice but to close the cafe down for good.
And that was Planet Savari's origins.
The fast food
1998
factory
mode.
was once again Wario's grand dream. But with events that had unfolded recently, their budget was not even close to fulfilling that dream. Still haunted by what he had seen, Wario made the decision to pursue another of his fields of expertise:
You're probably not gonna
video
like
game
this.
production. A much cheaper business to run, and one they could start with immediately. So they managed to buy an old building from an unknown company, which was sold to them by one of the previous owners of the building and one of the people of this unknown company, a man named Lucas. And so they officially started the company WarioWare Incorporated in 1990, with the slogan, "The #1 place in microgames production." And surely it went very well, and the company was a success. They even needed more manpower eventually and hired Toad as an assistant. Everything seemed to run smoothly. The corrupt spirits, however, were staying behind, keeping a distance. Why could that be? As it turns out, Wario himself, as well as the other workers, had a strange feeling while working there. A feeling that could not be explained. Wario considered the idea that it may have been the strange paranormal activities from the cafe that had followed them.
God.
But there was no sighting of them
That
anywhere,
is bizarre.
and this feeling was different. Vague. They all soon claimed the building was haunted. A rumor that spread across the city. WarioWare Incorporated is haunted, or has strange auras coming from it. That's what the word said. Yet it wasn't anything that troubled them to great extents, and they were able to continue their work. It took about a year of good work before another eerie breeze flew across WarioWare Incorporated. And Toad was the one who felt it the most. This feeling was not of anything paranormal per se, however,
Teeth?
but rather
Or is
a
that
real
just his
threat.
mouth? Like,
He started to report seeing what
Looks like
he
it's a
described as a monster roaming around outside, spotted by multiple witnesses in the area. This monster, described as a dragon-dinosaur hybrid, was given the name Bowser. At times, Toad was even hiding in a cabinet back in the tool storage of the building, fearing the monster's genuine threat. This is something he wrote about in his diary, especially around early 1991, and his fears would later become a reality. In 1993, Bowser, the rumored creature roaming the nearby area, entered WarioWare Incorporated and burned it to the ground. Apparently,
Wow.
this Bowser creature had capabilities of breathing fire from his mouth. The only one at work at the time was Toad, hiding in the tool storage cabinet. He had no way out. The building was burning around him, and he ended up dying, alone and afraid.
Damn.
The creature known as Bowser didn't make it out alive either, as the building started to crumble and fall apart, and he got crushed and stabbed by debris, wood and rock. The news of the fire spread fast, and Wario and Waluigi couldn't do anything but accept the horrific fate. The fire department found the body of Bowser, and speculation
Doesn't
started to
Bowser, like,
spread as to what
survive
this
a-
creature was.
Oh, he stabbed. Never
Was it
mind.
natural? Or an artificial creature?
Remember that stab
Why
mark?
did it come here to burn it down?
Right.
I guess.
This building specifically.
I mean,
It
when
was
he
buried
burns
under
alive,
the
he literally
old
becomes a
burned-down
dry-bone
office.
Bowser.
Toad's body, on the other hand, was never found. At this point, Wario and Waluigi had earned a massive profit, despite only running the production for a few years, and they once again had enough to get a loan and build the massive fast food factory, once again in 2004. From here, history repeats itself in most ways, just like the first timeline, where everything began. However, small changes were still occurring, and the ancient book containing the curse was found by Wario. But because their profit was still going well, he brought it down to the cellar, but didn't use it. Otherwise, they hired the three friends as workers like last time. Business was going well, everything was seemingly perfect once more. That was until, just like last time, Bruno Gates decided to commit the crime of his life and try to steal the recipe. And just like last time, all 5 workers ended up dead by Bruno's hand. The only real difference was Luigi, who did not willingly accept his death this time, as he had no knowledge of any evil to stop. These half-souls, their bodies contained, left their respectful bodies and ascended somewhere. To a paradise, something of a peaceful place, it is unknown. Exactly where, we do not know. This is, however, the point where the possessed halves of the spirits, that had been following them for years, stepped in, and once again took over the bodies of the dead, killing Bruno shortly after. This is where history changes up from what originally happened before the time split. The cursed bodies of Wario and the rest stayed within the factory walls, and furthermore, no one who investigated the factory found these bodies. The fact that Wario and his friends were never found, and no one truly knew what happened, obviously meant the factory closed down, seemingly for good. Some even claimed the factory was cursed.
Chapter 6, Lucas McCroy and Son.
God damn it.
What?
The Warriors brand was once again
Come on,
quiet,
play, 'cause I'm
Proceed to
gonna-
gone
begin
like
watching.
a memory. The factory closed.
There we go.
Okay, let's.
Alright,
Okay, let's.
sorry about that. I mean, that happens a lot.
Alright, it's back, it's back.
Okay, let's restart then. I also got that weird lag. Let's just restart.
Yeah, I got that too.
Chapter 6.
Lucas McCoy and Son.
Hey, I say that. Shut up.
You already said it though.
Whatever.
The Warriors brand was once again quiet,
Anyway,
gone like a memory. The factory closed. Wario and his friends gone like the wind.
Just like that
The
movie.
remains of WarioWare Incorporated
Just
was
like
also
the
a ghost of the
movie.
past. Until Christopher Peterson, the scientist working on the secret research programs, bought the building to use it and its old components for his own research. This did obviously not occur in the first timeline, as WarioWare never existed there. and Christopher was never allowed to purchase the building from the old owners in that timeline. But here, seeing as Wario was the owner and he was now declared dead, Christopher could buy it from the city itself. Despite events in this timeline being slightly different, Christopher was still focused on the topic of time, something he continued to research while in the old ruins of WarioWare Incorporated. But as time passed, he swore he could briefly hear his own voice echoing through the walls. Due to his knowledge of time, Christopher started to suspect that time had already been tampered with and split. That this timeline wasn't the only one existing, and that another Christopher existed somewhere. Was another part of him trying to make contact with him? Warn him about something? He couldn't know for sure, but the voice kept appearing now and then, distant and quiet. And it didn't take long before the sound of his own voice wasn't the biggest mystery anymore. An apparition, a face hidden in the darkness, could sometimes be seen in the corner of his eyes. Christopher was not sure if he was imagining things or if someone or something was watching him. Whatever he saw seemed to slip in and out of reality. He had a bad, eerie feeling. Something was not right about it. This feeling of his continued for days, until the silhouette could be seen clear as day. It was the body of a man, yet not quite. Something was off. Multiple limbs, distorted, maybe.
Mario?
Before he could even look at it more clearly, before he could even react, Christopher was gone. Vanished into thin air. The silence of the empty WarioWare Incorporated was back once again, and Christopher was nowhere to be seen.
Damn.
Weeks turned into months, which again turned into years. Christopher Peterson never returned. The fast food factory remained stationary, lost in time, almost like a magnet pushing everyone away from it. No one wanted to go inside. But during the years, people passing by swore they could see faces of the 5 missing people in the windows, staring out at them. Some of them smiling, others with a blank expression. Was it true? Or did people just imagine things? These rumors and the strange aura emitting from the factory caught the interest of one specific man. In the woods, away from the busy traffic and the loud noises from the city, was the house of Lucas McRoy, an old man and brilliant scientist. His wife was long gone, and his son Richard
That is terrifying.
had long moved out. Lucas McRoy was old and sick, but he was determined, strict, harsh, and smart. Perhaps more smart than he was wise. He was actually working for the same secret company as Christopher Peterson. However, Lucas was higher up in the system, one of the top scientists of the company, one of the top leaders of the research programs, and thus, when he heard about the strange happenings at the closed-off Wario's fast food factory, it naturally caught his attention. While he was not allowed inside, he was able to detect strange magnetic and electrical forces around the land where the factory was built. He was fascinated, confused, and in 2014, 7 years after the factory closed off, Lucas got a brilliant plan when he heard the government was planning to reopen the mysterious factory. He had to know more about this place and what caused the electrical and magnetic forces there and what secrets could exist in there. And so, he convinced his son, Richard, to apply for the job as a night guard, with a
You guys are
secret
gonna
intention
die
of
while
using
what
his
Richard
own
sounds
son
like.
as a method
Oh,
of obtaining
boy.
data and information about the place.
Oh boy.
You'll
Richard
see.
agreed, without knowing about his father's intentions,
There's the
and Richard
iconic
got the job.
office.
And the very next week,
Indeed.
Richard
I
McRoy
like how they use an
began
iron
his new
for that.
job as a night guard at the newly reopened Wario's fast food factory.
Chapter 7. 5 Nights at Wario's.
This is where the fun begins.
And the first and events of the first game take place.
Yes.
The week began. Richard arrived on time at 12 a.m., where he got a phone call from a co-worker known only as James.
Hello? Hello? Are you there?
James explained the work situation, what Richard's task was for the night, and that the factory had a dark past. Richard was confident
shit.
that this was going to go well. That was until he started to see someone on the monitor for the security cameras around the factory. Deep in the darkness, he could make out what looked to be a short man looking back at him. At first, Richard didn't think much of it, seeing as the cameras were low resolution and black and white. But things only got worse from there. The apparition on the cameras seemed to move closer and closer to Richard's office, and he could finally get a good look at the being outside his door. It was Wario. Dead, yet alive.
He's missing a
The
tooth.
situation started to snowball from there as
Two
more
teeth.
of the missing people who had been gone for 7 years reappeared in front of Richard's eyes, and they came closer and closer. What exactly were they after? Revenge, of course, on Bruno Gate, as their spirits were corrupted by the old curse put upon them. They were blind to anything else but
That is
revenge
legitimate nightmare
and
fuel.
hatred. They were out to kill Richard McRoy, and he quickly caught on to this realization. Using the mechanical doors and lights in his office, he managed to block out the 5 people as they tried to breach his office. But he was shaken, terrified, as he could not believe what was happening and what he was experiencing. He made it through the first night and immediately wanted to tell his employer about the situation, until he remembered his financial situation and how insanely well they were paying Richard for his job. He decided to keep his mouth shut, at least for a while, and continued throughout the week, where James would give him call each night for briefing, but getting more and more insecure and suspicious with each phone call. Richard McRoy remained unharmed for the following nights, seeing the corpses of the dead employees hunting him down. However, in addition to them, Richard swore he could see another different entity. A face floating in the hallway. Black eyes,
Oh god.
purple-like skin,
What? It's the Game Boy camera thing.
and before he knew it, it was gone. Like a hallucination. On the 5th night, James called once again, for the last time, confused as to why Richard was still there. He told Richard the factory had closed off only after 4 nights, and Richard had not been informed about this. As it turned out, his father,
what it's like.
Lucas, was one of the main investors in the fast food factory. Potentially, Lucas could have been the one withholding this information from Richard
terrified of his father.
in order to keep his son there to gather more data for his own research. Perhaps Lucas was onto something. Something so big that he was willing to use his own son as bait.
That's
As
pretty
James
cool.
and Richard were on the phone,
Damn.
James decided to come over and try to open the factory doors to let Richard out. But as he got closer and closer to the factory and finally arrived, an electrical buzz could be heard through the phone. James was gone. James was vanished. Did Wario kill him? Or what happened to him? As Richard did everything in his power to survive the fifth night, the clock hit 6 AM, and the automatic lock on the doors unlocked, and he escaped, and he ran back home. The 5 dead ones remained inside the factory walls for a while, wandering around with no sense of time. Wario's fast food factory closed off, and this time for good. But there was one more soul inside that still had not left. The spirit of Bruno Gate had not been able to let go, and had thus returned to his dead corpse inside the mascot costume he died in. And slowly but surely, his consciousness returned and became clear. He knew what he had to do. It did not take many weeks before Lucas McRoy passed away, something everyone around him, including his son Richard, had foreseen. Richard was now alone, or so he thought. As time passed, increasingly terrifying nightmares would become a common occurrence. Dreams of events back in the factory, dead faces jumping on him to tear his eyes out, as well as a surreal common dream of watching a television screen.
The events of the fourth game.
In these dreams, Wario and the rest from the factory would appear in empty, strange TV channels, including a channel named Cooking with Emma, amongst others. These specific nightmares felt a bit too real, yet surreal at the same time. Each dream began with a news report that got increasingly dramatic, where it eventually ended with the announcement of world catastrophe and TV viruses coming out of people's televisions. These dreams seemed to be affecting Richard's mood and behavior in his everyday life. Were these traumatic nightmares alone, or were there more to them? Throughout a week straight, the nightmares were at their worst and strongest, where Richard would dream of a tall, twisted version of Wario that felt more threatening, more menacing than the rest.
Oh my god.
What this meant, or if it had any meaning at all, was unclear to Richard at the time.
That's a
As it
huge
turned out,
bitch.
back in the abandoned factory, everybody had left. Except for 2. The lost and confused soul of Bruno Gate still roamed the factory halls. And the dead body of Luigi was laying on the floor, without moving an inch. His corrupted spirit had left the body, and was now somewhere else.
I wonder where. Chapter 8. Thomas Tyler's Discovery.
Three years passed since the reopening and closing of Wario's fast food factory. The dead still roamed around in secret looking for the one, as they called him. As the curse kept possessing them, it also grew stronger over time, and as it grew stronger, it was now able to transfer over to others and possess more people, adding to the corrupted army. Wario dug up and found the corpses of Toad and Bowser back at the old WarioWare Incorporated, and brought their dead bodies back to life, acting as soulless killing machines. He went on further to corrupt 2 more living beings, a girl named Ashley, as well as Yoshi. Those 2 stayed behind, but he kept them secure and under his control for later use. It was at this time in 2016, late 2016, that WarioWare Incorporated was reopened from the ashes. A certain person had bought the old company and had started to renovate it, bringing it back to life once more. As they were preparing for a reopening, the builders found 2 diary pages from Christopher Peterson. But aside of the rumors of a missing person named Christopher Peterson, they didn't think much of them, and so they left the diary pages where they found them. Renovation of WarioWare Incorporated was going well, and Wario, the previous owner of the building, and the original owner of WarioWare Incorporated, was watching closely. His spirit, as well as his body, was flowing with this strange energy or curse from the witch book, and as seen previously, it had the power to raise the dead. Wario had seen this all as an opportunity. Cursing an actual soul requires a lot of energy, and that is also why he found the dead bodies of Bowser and Toad and brought those back to life. The day had come for the grand reopening, and once more, a night guard was needed until proper security equipment could be installed. This job went to Thomas Taylor, a quiet Irish man eager to work during the quiet nights. Thomas didn't have any close relatives or friends, and so working during the night was perfect for him. As he sat down during midnight, the new owner of WarioWare Incorporated called him to inform him on the task of the night.
Guess who's this
And this
person?
new owner was none other than Richard McRoy.
Hello?
Richard.
Ah, you're already there. Splendid. That means you're ready to take on your new
Taco.
job.
Taco!
Yeah, anyway, this is WarioWare Incorporated,
Nice.
the #1 place
No
for micro
fucking
games
way.
production.
Richard
The
sounded
legend
confident,
himself.
strong, and almost like he was having fun, and mentioned to Thomas
It's the
the
man,
place
the
was
boy.
rumored to be haunted, referring to the old rumors when Wario and Waluigi was running the place back in the 90s. He also informed Thomas that Richard himself had experienced hauntings before, referring to his night shifts from back in the factory. The night shift began, and it did not take long until Thomas began noticing movement on the security cameras. It was Wario and the rest, who had of course been following the process of the reopening of his old studio. Anyone they could torment, torture, and eventually kill, they would. It was always fueled by the extreme emotions the Kurd brought out in their hearts. And a night guard was, just like in the factory, the perfect target. All of this contributed to the curse growing stronger. Although Thomas was older and wiser than Richard was, he too decided to stay multiple nights for the good payment. Although he tried to report his experiences, it was only met with laughter and strange looks. Richard was the only one who believed something strange was happening, even though Richard himself was acting strangely. He was surprisingly calm. As the
What is
week
that Windows
progressed,
7
the
wallpaper?
rumored dragon Bowser and the old missing employee Toad appeared, hunting Thomas down alongside the rest of the dead crew. Thomas was a brave man, a curious man,
What did they
who
do
was
to
able to
me?
stand his ground
Yikes.
without too
Look
much
at
trouble.
that thing in his chest.
And yet, Richard McRoy was sounding
Oh,
more and
God.
more
It's the blade.
insane
God.
each night on the phone. On the 6th and apparently final night of the week, Thomas started to
even
hear a
looked even more
demonic
terrifying.
tone in Richard's voice.
Now it's your turn to have some fun, eh? Ready, set, go!
As it turned out, the corrupt spirit of Luigi was possessing Richard, where he was used to lure people into the role of another security guard.
Before getting strapped
At this
to
point,
Luigi.
Richard was fully possessed by Luigi,
Shit.
and the real Richard was now hidden somewhere deep within. At this point, Thomas felt it was time to leave for good, making this his final shift. But as he went to rush to the exit doors, they were all shut tight, alongside the windows, making them impossible to open. He could not get out. All he could do was to hide in the office until somebody could come and save him, as his phone signal somehow wasn't working properly to make calls for help. The next night arrived, the 7th night, with Thomas still stuck inside, and he got yet another phone call from Richard McRoy. As Thomas was standing up from his chair, something strange occurred. Richard's voice on the phone was abruptly cut off, and the sound of electric static took its place, followed by dark, backwards talking.
So you better give them a warm welcome.
At the same moment, Thomas felt a weird, strange vibration in the entire room. Something was happening. The walls, the furniture, everything seemed to warp and twist for a brief moment, before everything seemed to stop once again, and the night continued as it had for the last week. Hiding in a back room, Thomas could hear the scream of a man, possibly Richard McRoy, who had apparently entered the building earlier the same night.
Hey, is that the
The hours passed by, and Thomas managed to
location
survive the
from-
final night and finally managed to
What
escape the
game was that
building.
from?
Oh, I forgot to
Here, he
mention,
was
this is
met
the
by
second game.
the police, and a witness named
Second
Matt Parker,
game.
who had called the police after hearing Richard's scream from within WarioWare Incorporated. Just a few minutes ago, Richard had apparently came running out of the building and was now on the run from the police. Thomas tried to explain what had happened, that he had been locked inside the building for the last 24 hours, with entities as well as Richard McRoy hunting him down.
Hey,
Thomas
can
slowly
you pause
calmed
this? I
down,
gotta go use the bathroom.
realizing it was all over and he was okay.
Hang on, another chapter.
That
from the
was
start.
until he saw the
Okay.
newspaper article the next
Another
day
chapter,
about the
jeez.
incident he was involved in. Thomas began his job in October of 2016.
I'm gonna eat all of my
Yet,
fucking Cheez
The
Its by the
newspaper
time we're.
article had the date May 8th, 2017. For some strange reason, 7 months had slipped by during his 1 week of night shifts. Thomas was speechless. He remembered the strange vibrations during the final night, and came to the conclusion that this had to be connected to the unbelievable time slip that he now was experiencing. Was it connected to the beings he encountered? Or was something else hidden within WarioWare? He had to get deeper into what this was all about. During the next night, he made his way over to the old Wario's fast food factory. Richard told him he had worked there, and so he simply had to figure out more about what was going on. There were simply too many questions in the air for a curious man like Thomas Taylor. So he broke into the abandoned factory and made his way down to the deep tunnels in the cellar. They kept going deeper and deeper, with keep out signs hanging in numbers. As he arrived at the very deepest room, he felt a strange pressure in his head. The room was small, with an old smelly book laying on the table. He noticed his watch was going crazy and his compass was spinning in all directions, and none of his electronic equipment were working properly.
Like it's the Minecraft Nether.
It was as if he had hit some special magnetic field. Thomas was curious, slightly frightened, and mostly intrigued. To check that it wasn't just his own equipment malfunctioning, he went upstairs and brought down lots of electrical equipment. And as soon as he tried to turn it all on at once, it happened. a bright purple flash filled the entire small cellar for a brief moment before everything turned dark and silent once more. And Thomas Taylor was gone.
Alright, you can. Oh, wait. Alright, bathroom break.
Yeah. All right.
Thank God.
Let me
Yeah.
shut off my lines.
Alright.
Okay.
Alright. Chapter 9. The Cycle.
This fucking video is a cycle, what I can gather.
Is this a Rosalina story because of the blue?
After the events in the mysterious WarioWare Incorporated, the Cursed Ones continued the search for revenge. Up until this point, several people had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Christopher Peterson, disappearing suddenly in the old WarioWare Incorporated back in the 90s. James, vanishing into thin air as he tried to help Richard McRoy in the factory in 2014. And now Thomas Taylor disappearing in the depths of Wario's old factory. What happened to them all? Where did they all go? Perhaps later in our story, we will get an answer to all of it. As Wario was walking with his undead army, the cursed corpse of the Bowser creature blasted fire from his mouth in an uncontrollable state,
Oh my
burning Wario's skin on his face right down to the bone, due to Bowser not being alive anymore, and thus his body functioned as a machine for the
I think
curse to
that's good.
control. And since the attention
I
and
like his bloody
focus
spikes.
got deviated for a bit, Bowser's fiery functions got unleashed.
That makes it even more menacing for Bowser.
He removed the curse from Bowser, and the body returned to its lifeless state.
So it
Before
wouldn't
the
happen
travel
again.
continued on from WarioWare Incorporated, the spirit of Luigi left Richard McRoy's body, and instead, the spirit of Peach took its place, leaving her body behind in the now closed-off WarioWare Incorporated, and Luigi caught up with them after rising once more back in the factory where his body was located. They were going to continue to use Richard McRoy to further hunt down people in a never-ending spiral of revenge. It was now late 2017. Through manipulation and lies, the Cursed Ones managed to trick a young man known as Edward Coleman into a false job. Although they could simply kill him right away, the curse inside would grow stronger the more they tormented souls first. Wario claimed to be from a company known as Secure Incorporated and told poor Edward that he had gotten a job to secure a big house while the family living there was on vacation. Edward Coleman, being young and naive, applied immediately and traveled to the house in question the very same night. This house was the one and only McRoy family house. As Richard was now the official owner after his father's passing, the house was empty and acted as a perfect place to bring victims to. Edward arrived, and immediately he got a phone call from Secure Incorporated.
Guess who's this guy?
The man calling him was in fact Christopher Peterson's cousin, Max Peterson.
Hello? Oh, thank God. You're in the house, right? Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Max. I'm one of the employees at your new job, but that's not important right now. What is important is for you to get out of there.
Oh no.
Max was terrified as he called
Excuse me.
and explained to Edward Coleman that no real employer had contacted Edward and that this house was not in need of any security. It was all a prank, a trap.
None of you were gonna say bless
And
you.
as we know,
I think
this
it was.
trap was
Oh,
set
I
up
think
by
it was
Wario and his
Raspassky.
allies. Max explained further that no one had lived there for years,
Cool.
ever since Lucas McRoy died, and that Edward
That's who
needed
Max
to get out.
Peterson
The
is
house
voiced
already
by.
had security cameras put out, from when Secure Incorporated had secured the house years before. Surprisingly, getting out was not possible for Edward. Doors were sealed and windows boarded up.
What is this, a zombie
And
apocalypse?
hallways that led to exits were leading
What is this, a
seemingly
zombie
nowhere.
apocalypse?
It was the curse creating hallucinations and illusions and trapping Edward inside. Max said that sending someone over could make things worse. So Edward was on his own, with the assistance of Max on the phone. And lo and behold, Wario and the rest, now including Yoshi and Ashley, were there to hunt him down, to eventually kill him. Even after surviving a night, Edward was not able to leave, and had to sneak around for food and water before a new night approached. 4 nights in a row, Edward was hiding in various rooms around the house, using whatever means he had to defend himself against the threats that were tormenting him, while Max Peterson checked in on him every night through phone
The
calls.
Playroom.
Some phone calls were interrupted
So nasty.
by Richard McRoy. Of course, since Richard was possessed,
Except that only
he
happened
was
on the
part
whole
of this
night.
plan.
Hello, hello. This is a friend. How are you tonight?
On the 5th night, however,
He's possessed
something
by a girl, that's why he
unexpected
sounds a
happened.
bit odd. Or acting a bit odd.
As yet another sun was setting and midnight was approaching, purple light, as from a strong colored spotlight, filled the room for a brief second. And Edward, suddenly and shockingly, found himself in a room that did not belong to the McRoy house. It was an old, pitch-black cellar. Edward had no idea what was happening. The room was cold and smelled rusty and left behind by time itself. Max called once again and was surprised to hear Edward's location. Max could confirm that the McRoy house had no cellar. Where exactly did Edward end up? Why was he seemingly teleported to this place? Before Max could say much more, Richard McRoy stormed into his office and stabbed Max Peterson right in the back.
TF2 logic.
Max died in his office chair.
Yeah.
Richard, fully possessed by the spirit of Peach, picked up the phone and talked to Edward for a short moment, saying he was coming over very soon, before hanging up. The spirits were always on the hunt for the one, and every time a soul was tormented or killed, the curse grew stronger. Edward, using the night vision camera on his pad, managed to survive for many hours during the night, until finally Richard McRoy himself came down there. Without
6 a.m.
hesitation, Richard killed Edward in cold blood.
Tragic.
Oh, shit.
Silence. A pause. Before the possessed Richard McRoy brushed it off as, "So it wasn't you either." All of them, Richard, Wario and the rest, walked through the deep cellar and walked back upstairs, and exited Wario's fast food factory. This cellar was none other than the old cellar of Wario's fast food factory. During the many years of possession, the curse had grown strong enough to be able to transport matter through space, and now they transported Edward Coleman and the rest from the McRoy house into one of the many corridors of the deep cellar in Wario's factory. But why?
Teleportation.
Why teleport Edward and themselves away? And why to Wario's
To what
factory
the
of all
phone
places?
says.
They continued their search for the next victim. But this is where the journey, on one hand, would come to an end. Rosalina had been watching, ever since her husband Christopher disappeared in WarioWare Incorporated.
Oh no. Oh no.
On a deserted
Lag.
road, in the middle of nowhere, she met with him, face to face, carrying one of Christopher's inventions with her. A rod. The very same rod Christopher made for her in the first original timeline, only this one was more stable and powerful. And just like back then, she used it to open a time portal, absorbing the corrupted spirits out of the bodies sending them back through time itself. Back to the very same 1988. This time, however, a new timeline was not created. It simply went back in time and started all of the events over again. The spirits were once again haunting Wario's cafe. Wario once again bought a building from an unknown company and started WarioWare. It once again burnt down, and the rest of the events that followed were identical to before. This second timeline was now stuck in a loop, a cycle, that seemingly had no end. The timeline repeated itself countless times, and only one single event was eventually able to break it.
Chapter 10. Acceptance.
The events of the second timeline repeated themselves
How
countless
many chapters
times.
have there left?
How many precisely? No one knows.
We're halfway done.
But it did not go on until the end of time. In one of the many cycles, a slight alteration occurred. An alteration that would end this loop once and for all. In the McCroy house, Edward Coleman was once again hiding, only this time the house had pieces of an old music box scattered throughout the various rooms. As Edward was hiding in fear throughout the nights, he picked these pieces up and brought them with him. Not being entirely sure why himself, but he did it. He just had a gut feeling that this music box would be important.
That is a weird
On the
music
fifth
box.
and final night, he was once again transported into the depths below Wario's closed factory, and all the pieces of the broken music box were collected. He had tried to assemble and fix it the day before, and as he was down here in the darkness, all he could think about was to play it. Even though it would risk the evil entities finding him, he just felt it was the right thing to do. And to Edward's big surprise, a person came running down towards him. A person trapped inside a Wario mascot costume. It was the restless soul of Bruno Gates, who had wandered around the factory's corridors for years, unable to let go and rest. He came running to the sound of the music box because, somewhere in the depths of his being, the sound of the music box reminded him of someone very dear to him. As he approached Edward, who was stuck in fear, the other corrupted dead ones entered the very same room. For the first time since the killings occurred in the factory, Wario and the rest were standing face to face with the killer, the one as they had been searching for years. They did not attack him. They became calm, sharp, focused, intense. Until Bruno Gates let all his grief out in an honest, deep apology.
And now we have the good ending of Final Wario 3.
Ah.
This is the full good ending, so I'm gonna fast forward a little bit. Come on! There we go. So I'm gonna fast forward a tiny bit. So basically apologizes, and then
He did it! He apologized!
female
He
Dako,
apologized to them for what they did to us.
and then listen to this.
I can feel it. Their forgiveness has brought peace to both him and
Because we all
them.
know the good ending of Final Wario 3.
I feel relieved.
This is your last warning! Put your hands above your
Damn.
head now!
Damn.
That police voice, soft voice. Who voiced the policeman?
I don't know. It's someone I don't recognize. And originally, the story ended there. But
at that moment, a deep relief and acceptance illuminated deep in all of their souls, and they finally managed to detach from the curse. The spirits of the victims, Wario, Waluigi, Peach, Mario and Luigi, all finally let go and reached a higher realm, and their dead bodies finally collapsed onto the ground for the final time. The curse was also lifted from Ashley and Yoshi and Toad. The curse seemed to have been broken at last. Peace was returned to the city, and Edward Coleman escaped Wario's fast food factory. All this chaos seemed to be over at last. But as it turned out, this was only the first act. The first main step in a deeper master plan, carefully planned out by someone or something sinister behind the scenes. Did the curse just vanish into thin air after detaching from the souls of our heroes? No, it did not. It was very much alive and stronger than ever. Instead, this dark energy latched itself onto Bruno Gates' spirits like an animal jumping on its prey. And Bruno's soul was starting to get pulled downwards. Beyond the floor, beyond the dirt, beyond the earth itself. Bruno got dragged into the realm where this demonic curse originated from. Let's back up a bit. There was a reason no one had bought this piece of land before Wario did. There's a reason Thomas Taylor felt a strong pressure as he walked through the factory cellar. There's a reason why the curse teleported Edward Coleman to this exact location. Wario's factory is the access point, the thinnest layer between the two worlds. Everything that had happened until now was a plot, a plan, where all of it played out the way it was meant to. Only a man as full of greed as Wario would buy the land that no one dared to buy before him. Only a man as full of greed as him would curse his friends for money. Why did the cycle happen over and over again, only for the music box pieces to appear in the very last loop? It was Wario, or rather, the curse on him, that did it. Through countless cycles and countless killings, the curse in them had grown so much stronger than it was originally. Strong enough, in fact, to pursue the next step of the secret master plan that was at work. By letting itself be sent through a loop by Rosalina, it grew stronger and stronger with each loop. And by placing out the music box pieces and having Edward Coleman bring them with him, they then took him to Wario's factory. The curse knew Wario's factory was the quickest and easiest pathway between the two worlds. And it knew Bruno Gate was still in the factory, and that he, Bruno, was the key to break this attachment to the souls. As Bruno apologized, the souls found peace. Everything seemed to be over for a moment. But now, this evil energy that had been feeding off the spirits of Wario and the rest for countless years and countless cycles of years were free and stronger than ever. And the next step in the master plan was to take Bruno Gate's spirits with them to the realm below creation. This could only be done now, and not before. The curse had to grow strong enough for the task, and Bruno's spirit was a strong one, explaining why it could even remain in his body after death. Bruno Gate, who thought he finally had found peace, was dragged down, pulled into another dimension altogether. he was always the main target, not Wario. Wario and the others were just a bridge to grow stronger. But why did a curse need to drag a human soul down to this mysterious unknown realm? And why did it need a strong spirit like Bruno's? We will learn more about that a bit later. So you may be wondering, how can a curse know something? Is it sentience? Intelligence? Well, remember when the curse was first released? How one of the purple lights, the purple smoke puffs, released from the book was bigger than the others. What was that? It's time to dig deeper and see what's hiding underneath creation itself.
Whoa.
That's only part 1.
Jesus.
Now we got part 2, which is 2 hours and 12 minutes.
Oh my god.
Oh god.
You thought we were done? We're close to being done? Nah, son. We're just halfway done. I know this is gonna be a long recording session.
3 hours, actually.
I told you.
Ugh.
And yes, I'm gonna be in this Wario voice for the rest of the video.
Christ.
And now... WWW Body presents the full story of Finance of Warriors, Part 2. Because now, if you've not seen Part 1, you need to watch that first. We already did!
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, Chapter 11. Gray City.
Bruno woke up. He did not know what was happening, where he was, even if he was alive or dead. Who was he again? The confusion in his soul had gotten the best of him. All he knew was that he was lying in a street in the middle of a huge 1930s-like styled city. Neon and red lights in windows. Light rain was hitting his forehead. The sound of traffic in the distance. Where was he?
Okay, looks pretty handsome.
Right in front of him was a massive, colorful theater. Maybe someone inside could help him out, he thought, and so he went inside. He entered the massive main theater hall. Completely empty, with no people around. Suddenly, a voice on the speakers started talking, as if a show was about to begin for Bruno alone.
Welcome, welcome. The theater is proud to present tonight's shows. If this is your first time visiting, we hope the experience will be one to remember.
The voice was inviting, excited, and talked about how Bruno would be participating in this interactive theater experience. Bruno just wanted to ask for help, but no one was there to hear him out. In the middle of the speech of the announcer, Bruno blacked out.
Alright, fair.
Feeling like he was
Little
pulled
guy,
into a
you gotta
dark
look at
void
this.
for a brief moment. In here, he heard a distorted, electrical voice speaking to him.
Oh, I've seen this before.
Yeah, this is the events of 5 shows at Wario's.
Uh, I actually seen the original version of this quote-unquote take. You're a Jack Thatcher or whatever it was.
Really? That's what it was?
Yeah, I seen the original version of this quote-unquote twist of what is currently going on right now on the screen.
Before Bruno
I
could
actually know
process
what
it
it
all,
is.
and even
Never
ask
knew
who it
this
was who
before.
was talking to him, he was thrown back into the theatre hall. The show was apparently
That was
about
weird.
to begin.
It's in our choices that results emerge. I believe we are ready. Let the shows begin.
But this was no ordinary theatre show. Behind the curtains, strangely enough, were 5 tunnels, each leading to a different experience that Bruno had to survive. It was here he realized he was part of some game or prank or trap, perhaps. And if he wanted to leave unharmed, he had to just play along.
Look at now.
And as
Take
he
a look at
participated
these
in these
guys.
surreal tasks, familiar faces slowly creeped out from the darkness.
Get a load of
Twisted,
this.
deformed versions of Wario and the rest were attacking
Hey,
him, torturing him, and messing with him. These abominations were what is known as the virus. The virus is really just another name for the curse. These entities were therefore the curse itself, manifested as sentient individual beings, taking the forms of the people it had possessed previously. Now, how did this happen? Creating an individualization of the curse, being these virus characters required the curse itself to be powerful. And until now, it hadn't been powerful enough to go through with this process. But now, through many years of possession, the curse was not only powerful enough to drag Bruno Gates' soul down to this realm, but also to create individual pieces of itself, resembling the people it once possessed. So who created them? Did this energy on its own decide to take a part of itself and make it a sentient being? Not quite, but not far from it either.
Look at that big jaw.
Remember back in
Oh
Wario's
my.
fast food factory when Richard believed he saw a face floating in a hallway? This was
Okay,
no
boy,
illusion.
camera dude.
This was the dark energy formation
Yeah,
released
yeah, like
alongside the
camera.
others when the curse got released from the book. This is the hive mind of the virus itself, the source of the curse and the sentient container for this dark energy. This is Emma, and she has been here ever since this chaos got released. She let her powers slowly grow as it possessed the others, letting them play their game of cat and mouse while she was watching from the shadows as the master plan was unfolding.
What the hell is that thing?
As he looked at previous frames, just edited
As the
in.
timeline cycle happened over and over again, her powers grew more and more powerful until it was strong enough to drag Bruno Gates' soul down to this realm, where she originates from. This realm, this strange city with obscure dark elements and screams echoing throughout the streets, is known as Grey City, the realm below creation. The world where Emma and her powers were created. Richard McRoy's nightmares about TV channels were not merely random thoughts manifesting in his dreams. As Richard was being possessed at the time, these nightmares were in fact a glimpse into the realm of Grey City. The TV channels named Cooking with Emma was in fact a direct insight into one of these theater shows that Bruno had to go through. And the tall, abnormal Wario figure appearing in Richard's dreams The one known as Nightmare Wario or Demon Wario? This was none other than Emma herself, taking on one of her two forms. So the question remains, is all this was a plot for Emma to drag Bruno Gate down to Grey City? What did she plan to do with him here? Torture his soul, play with him, toy with him? Bruno slowly but surely completed the show trial set before him, shocked by the sheer confusion and terror he was experiencing. But by the end, a deep, soothing voice talked to him, apologizing for dragging him into the theater, and told him that he was free to leave and to look for a trapdoor in the back of the theater. Bruno immediately ran back to try and find the exit, and came across a small hut outside on the backside. Inside was indeed a trapdoor, as well as a tape recorder that somebody had left behind. Playing the tape revealed the voice of an Irish man who claimed to be trapped underneath, and that the trapdoor did not lead to any tunnel or cavern or cellar, but instead an entire house, strangely enough.
I'm trapped down here, but I still have hope. Hope that I will find my way out of here, and hopefully this recording reaches anyone who suffers a similar fate as I currently do. Here, underground, there is a structure. A building.
Bruno took the chance, confused, and jumped down the trapdoor, only to land in an attic of an old house.
An Irishman.
Logically, it was impossible, and he had no idea what was going on.
Or I wonder who's
But
an
he quickly
Irish person
realized
in
that
the story.
this too was a trap, a mistake. The curse, the virus, was approaching the house he found himself in. Looking out the window, the house was seemingly in the middle of nowhere. Using instructions from the man on the tape recorder, Bruno did what he could to keep the entities out, blocking off any entrance or other mysterious access points they had. Terrified, he managed to open more and more doors in the house, allowing him to explore and thus encounter more twisted faces of people the curse once possessed. Running out and away was not an option, as the landscape seemed to stretch endlessly, and one of the virus formations was roaming around in a small forest nearby. So instead, he aimed for the basement of the house. Down in the basement, he found a statue of Emma's Demon Wario form, as well as a long handwritten letter. A letter from the same man who had recorded the voice message earlier. A message, Thomas Taylor.
The guy from the
The
second
letter
game.
explains his journey after the incident at WarioWare Incorporated, where he went over to Wario's factory and discovered the closed-off cellar, and how he somehow got transported through the use of high electrical power. Now it was confirmed. When Thomas Taylor disappeared, he bridged the gap and found himself in Grey City, where he was transported by a mysterious man to this very theater, where he was then in the presence of something sinister. Something more sinister and evil than Emma. This mysterious entity asked Thomas how he found this place, before sending him here to this house. This is how Emma, through this mysterious entity, learned that Wario's factory was indeed a point where the two worlds were close to each other, and acted as a perfect place to drag Bruno through. And seeing as Bruno was wandering confused around the factory at the time, it fit perfectly with Emma's plan. That is why she transported Edward and the rest to Wario's factory. Bruno, stuck in the factory, was the one who could break the curse on the spirits of Wario and the rest, and Wario's factory was the bridge between the two worlds. It all worked perfectly into the master plan. But where was Thomas Taylor now? Was he still here? There was no traces of him left, aside from this letter. Bruno obviously did not know who Thomas Taylor was, so he kept on hiding until he hits a dead end in the house, where the viruses attacked him at full force. Completely exhausted and drained, Bruno saw the viruses retreat. Was it over? That's when the theater voice returned, announcing the show trials were over. And as it turned out, this voice was none other than Emma, who had been talking to Bruno all along. And Emma goes on to explain more of the plan that was unfolding before Bruno's eyes. She explains how the curse had to grow strong before it could drag Bruno down here to Grey City, how the virus entities can be created in shapes of people it had possessed, and how the plan for Bruno was to weaken his soul through spiritual torture. By weakening Bruno's soul, it could more easily be manipulated and used by Emma. Due to the strength of a human soul, a soul that doesn't belong in a place like this, it could now be used as a bridge between Grey City and the real world. Emma can bring all of her powers now into the real world, including her newly created virus entities. All thanks to Bruno's strong soul that was now weakened due to the spiritual torture he had now endured. But why? Why? For what purpose? Why did Emma want to bring all of her powers into the real world? Just to create chaos? Or was there a more direct purpose to it? The reason was to free him, in order to finally free her master.
Chapter 12. The Master Plan. Oh yeah, this is another part where you had to watch.
Bruno Gates was slowly realizing what was going on. Everything that had happened the way Emma wanted to. It was all part of her plan to weaken his soul and thus use it as a link between the world above to release her curse fully onto the world. Only a human soul can release Emma and her powers into the world, which explains why Wario could release a small portion of it from the ancient book, and why Emma could now travel with all her powers, using Bruno's soul as a sort of a tunnel or gateway. And with a large, rumbling noise, and what felt like a shock going through him, Emma and the viruses were gone. They had escaped. A deep silence filled the dark void for a long time, until that unknown soothing voice returned once more.
Alright, get ready for this.
The voice told Bruno how his part was complete, and that the curse was now fully out in the world, ready to take it back. As the voice talked, a gigantic silhouette was slowly appearing in the darkness. While we wait, why not play another game? The voice asked. Bruno was frozen and did not respond. That's when the shape in the darkness showed itself fully.
Keep watching.
The most terrifying sight Bruno had ever witnessed.
Feast your eyes on this bad boy.
The fuck? Bowser? Oh!
Why was a Giga Bowser design necessary for the mastermind?
This was him. This is the one Emma referred to as her master.
I hate how I always have to do this.
This was Emma's creator. the devil himself. The original evil and the highest being of Grey City, and the very origin of the curse itself. This devil was only known as Entity 01. Emma was his powers, or rather a fraction of his powers. Emma was the manifestation of his powers that was now able to escape into the real world through a single human soul. Now, Bruno's purpose in this master plan was complete. So what exactly was Entity 01's master plan? What was his end game? His goal? What is the reason behind all of these events unfolding? Was it simply to put fear and despair into people's hearts? Was it to kill everyone on Earth? Or did he have some deeper desire? Entity 01 did have a goal. The ultimate goal. Just as Grey City was the realm below creation, so also did a realm above creation exist. A heavenly paradise, as this devil describes it, filled with flowers and gardens with no end. He believed this heavenly place was the place of origin, the place where everything, including himself, was created. Getting back to this place, where he came into existence to learn the truth of why he's trapped down in this underworld and learn the truth of what he really is. That was the ultimate goal of Entity 01. And how could he reach this place? That's where his plan comes in. As he himself had way too much power to exit the dimension of Grey City, and as even the full extent of his powers were too much to slip through into the real world, he managed to send just one tiny fraction of his powers a long time ago. This was the form of a book that held a small amount of his curse inside it. Emma, in her earliest stages. It was everything he was able to send through into the real world above. There were even religious cults from back in the day that worshipped the mythical devilish one through the discovery of this book that promised wealth and power to those who followed its instructions. As people, and especially an ancient witch coven that had found deep interest in the mythology of Entity 01, went through with rituals, the curse residing within the book slowly grew stronger. In modern times, it was strong enough to finally escape the book, should someone manage to release it. Wario released it, and her powers cursed them all and started to grow even further, like a leech draining their energies. However, this was still only a small part of Entity 01's powers. In the end, Emma would only be strong enough to bring down one human soul. And if it was going to use this soul later to escape back into the world, the soul had to be a strong one. Hence why Bruno Gates became this unfortunate victim. Now, Emma, which is a manifestation of a part of Entity 01's powers, had escaped back into the world through Bruno's tormented soul, and was now free in the world with much more of Entity 01's powers with her. The curse could finally start to spread like wildfire, growing stronger and stronger until, eventually, far off in a distant future, it would be strong enough to bring Entity 01 himself up into the real world. And once there, all he would have to do would be to find the access point. The point with the thinnest layer between the world and the heavenly dimension above. Now, all he had to do, and all he could do, was wait. Wait for the viruses in the world to start infecting the world. But it would not take long, for time in Grey City was flowing at a different rate than the real world. As for this final game, Entity 01 puts
Yeah.
Bruno Gates through another trial. Not solely for the sake of torture, however, but as a test. A test to see just how strong his soul truly is. Should his plan somewhere along the way go wrong, he had a backup plan, a plan B. And if Bruno's spirit could survive this upcoming trial, then Bruno would play a big part in this backup plan. Bruno was suddenly transported out of this nothingness and into a new building in this strange city. But something was familiar. Too familiar for his own liking. Bruno was back in Wario's fast food factory. A recreation of it. An illusion of it. And in this illusion was also the illusion of the very same people he killed. Bruno was unaware that this was all a trick, a hallucination if you will, and instantly got flashbacks to his crimes in the factory and immediately went into defense mode. Impressively, Bruno used any means he could to defend himself throughout this false factory, and in the end managed to outplay the illusion and escape it. Entity 01 was impressed. His test was complete, and Bruno passed. There was clearly a deep motivational power in his spirit. What was it exactly that kept Bruno going so strongly? As a final act, before the long wait began, Entity 01 presented Bruno with a machine. A memory arcade, meant as a final kick in the face to the broken man. Bruno was forced to watch the screen. And what he saw broke him even more. Here, Bruno had to relive the last meeting with Dolores Gates, his wife.
Oh boy.
I knew it.
Damn.
Bruno's core motivation had always been his daughter. To make her healthy once more. It was the reason he broke into Wario's factory to steal the recipe. It was the reason he was desperate to get out alive and unnoticed, even if it would mean the cost the lives of others. And it was one of the reasons his soul could not rest even after death. As he was walking aimlessly around the factory in his dead physical body during the events of the cycle, the one sound that instantly awoke something deep within him and drew his attention to it was the sound of the music box that Edward Coleman had brought with him. It was the very same music box his daughter had, and hearing it immediately drove him in its direction. His daughter was in the very core of his being. This is why the music box was able to attract Bruno Gates. Bruno, now sitting in this nothingness and watching his last meeting with his wife, knowing he failed his promise to both her and his daughter, was left with the worst, horrific and hopeless feeling of all. And now, he was all alone.
Bert, can you, like, not type?
Chapter 13. Apocalypse.
Oh boy.
You thought that was a doozy.
During the events happening down in Grey City, Edward Coleman had left Wario's fast food factory early in the morning. Heavy rain hit his head, as he was concerned about Max Peterson, the man who had called him each night to see if he was okay. Edward eventually reached Secure Incorporated, the place where Max Peterson worked. Inside, he saw Max lying face down on his desk,
Yeah, Bert, please.
with a stab wound in his back. He was gone, killed by Richard McRoy earlier the same night. Here, Edward found 3 diary entries, written by Max. The first diary talked about James, someone apparently Max knew about. Max writes that James just vanished, disappeared, while working at Wario's fast food factory in 2014. He writes how James's body was never found, so he was sure that James was alive somewhere. The second diary talks about his cousin Christopher, and how he too disappeared, in a similar manner. The diary talks about how Christopher was using the WarioWare building for research after it burned down in 1993. It further talks about rumors that were going around at the time. Rumors that the very secret company he and Lucas McRoy were working for had discovered an ancient DNA of a dragon-like creature. Max speculates here, in this entry, about the connection between this DNA rumor and WarioWare burning down, and the potential connection between the two. Was Bowser this rumored ancient creature? And did Christopher's company resurrect it? Did this company have a hand in WarioWare burning down? Did they command the creature to burn it to the ground? If so, why? The third entry was the news entry, and here Max had written about Edward Coleman and how someone must have tricked him into the job here at Secure Incorporated. Max then goes on to talk about Christopher again and the last phone call the two of them had before Christopher disappeared. In this final phone call, Christopher had talked about his research, as well as hearing his own voice echoing throughout the hallways. This voice was hard to make out, but Christopher had claimed the voice was saying Emma. This was the final entry Edward found. He went on to look around the building of Secure Incorporated. No one else was around except the body of Max Peterson. As Edward was walking through one of the hallways, An unknown voice screeched through the air, as if it was tearing itself through the walls. The voice said, "Mr. Coleman, are you there? It's not over. They're not gone. Get out of there. Get out. I don't know why, but..." It was the voice of Christopher, warning Edward Coleman about something, before the voice got cut off. What was happening? What was with all these voices of Christopher echoing through the halls everywhere? First the voice talking to himself in WarioWare and mentioning the name of Emma, and now it was back talking to Edward. Later, we may just learn what's going on with Christopher in this case. But maybe you've started to make some connections. The Christopher of this timeline had vanished many years ago, back in WarioWare. So, was this him? Or could this be the one from the first original timeline? The one who used his own time machine on himself? And his warning was no joke. Edward heard a rumbling sound from within the building. He still had his pad with him and managed to connect it to the building's camera system, as they were the same types used in the McCroy house. There, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Wario was back, only in a shape that was straight out of a nightmare. This was Virus Wario. Emma and her newly created viruses had just escaped into the world through Bruno Gate. And judging by Christopher's voice suddenly being cut off, it is possible that he became the first victim of this up-and-coming apocalypse, and Edward seemed to be the next one. Edward tried to escape, while keeping track of Virus Wario on his camera pad. Eventually he reached the exit door, only to be met by Virus Wario, who killed Edward Coleman on the spot. 2 dead bodies were now present in Secure Incorporated, killed by the same core monster. The world would never be the same. The viruses, the curse, kept a low profile in the beginning, and people felt something strange in the air. Things were not right. And it didn't take long before people started to notice that things were wrong, as people slowly, one by one, were reported missing, never to be seen again. One of these unfortunate victims was a man we know from before, Winslow.
Okay,
There was
Max.
news aimed directly towards Winslow that the old Wario's Cafe was opening once again in early 2018, 30 years after the original opening. And since Winslow had experience from this place, they wanted him back as an employee. Winslow was the very same person who had been calling Wario on the phone during his night shifts back in the late 80s. And as Winslow heard they were reopening the old cafe once more, a strong sense of nostalgia came brushing over him like a summer breeze. He accepted the offer immediately. The strange thing was that no one else had heard about this, and Winslow himself didn't know who these new owners were. He was called by one of the employers, who didn't even introduce himself, and Winslow was told that they wanted to bring joy to people by bringing back the old Wario's experience from back in the day.
Hey, look at that! I found your number! Alright, now, listen up. I really do appreciate you taking time out of your day to do this. But dude, this will turn out amazing!
Winslow's first task was to come to the cafe and check on the place, the equipment available, etc. And so we did. Cameras were still functioning somewhat. Lamps and electrical components were in order. And while browsing through the old camera system, Virus Wario could be seen on the attic camera for a brief second, before the monitor itself cracked. Winslow flinched and froze in place. Flashbacks from the original diner's events came back to him, as if a nightmare from before had now become a reality. everything was silent. Slowly but surely,
Press E to
Winslow
begin
headed
watching.
towards the
Press E
exit.
to begin
On his
eating
way
my
through the
ass.
cafe, he felt dizzy and a strong red color filled his vision before blacking out.
Ah, there's the infamous line.
You are a victim number 9999999999999.
Okay. Claim your price now.
He
Claim
woke
your
up again in the
prize
cafe
now.
the following night, and he couldn't leave. Exits were blocked off, there was no signal to call for help outside. He was all alone.
This was the order.
That is, when it came to human interaction. Because with him in the cafe were the virus entities, hunting him down and tormenting him as poor Winslow tried to grasp the situation.
Oh, God.
Did an unknown company truly reopen Wario's cafe? Or was this all a trick? Where they lured Winslow into a false sense of safety and nostalgia in order to trap him? Was the man who had called Winslow earlier the voice of these creatures? Or was it an actual employee of a company?
I still
This
don't
question
like
would
that.
remain unanswered forever. And we will never know for sure if an actual company decided to reopen Wario's cafe, or if this was all a trick by Emma's viruses. Winslow was trapped in a cafe for many days, slowly losing energy due to hunger and lack of water, as well as the viruses toying with his fear to the extreme. All currently created viruses acted slightly differently. The one resembling Luigi would put Winslow in an existential crisis by making him question his reality with computer ads and other forms of world-bending shenanigans. The one resembling Mario would reach out of a mirror with unusual body proportions, only to retract into a decoy shell once he escaped.
Oh.
They all tortured Winslow psychologically, until finally, when he couldn't bear it anymore, they killed him. And so the curse kept growing, stronger and stronger, over several years, picking up momentum as it went on. Eventually, it started to spread like a plague. There was nothing humanity could do. Entity 01's plan was working. The virus entities and the rest of Emma's powers were wreaking havoc across the globe.
Chapter 14. The house with the green door.
How many chapters are there?
20.
My God.
The year is
so we're almost there then.
2745.
Wow, we're in the future.
In a hidden laboratory, the last man on Earth sits quietly on his own. Christopher was waiting in anticipation. Here, in the distant future, where every man, woman and child were gone, the virus had destroyed them all. This was the Christopher who originated from the original first timeline, back in the very beginning of our story, back when the curse got unleashed for the very first time. Christopher made a deal with Rosalina that she would send their souls back in time to hopefully reset everything, and Christopher would use himself as an experiment. Where he ended up was here, in 2745, in one of the laboratories belonging to the company that remained untouched. Just like Christopher had feared, the events back in the factory simply continued on in a new timeline and led to every sinister event that followed, resulting in this wasteland. During his time here, he had found lots of intel. Diaries, news articles, voice recordings, all information that helped him to understand how the current situation had ended up in its current state. As Christopher's understanding of time evolved, he finally cracked the code and figured out what had happened. The two timelines, due to the long passing of time, had merged back into one, combining. This meant that this was the ultimate outcome. The virus had grown strong and was roaming the Earth, looking for any survivors remaining. As Christopher continued his dedicated research, all alone in this strange future, his machine were able to eventually detect a dark energy stronger than any other. It seemed to be sort of a hive mind, the brain behind the cursed entities roaming outside. Although he couldn't see this dark source, he could detect it, and he called it Emma. It became Christopher's theory that Emma had plans to eradicate all life on Earth, or even some other plan to keep growing stronger on her own. He feared she was watching him, knew about him, and he feared that if she found out he knew about her, that he was trying to stop her plan, she would kill him. If this was the case, he had to get help. If this knowledge died with him, there was no one left to save them. That's when he decided to spend an enormous amount of power to activate his time machine. It lit up in a purple light, sparkled with electricity, and once the flares had died out, James was standing inside the machine, confused, scared, terrified. This is where James ended up when he disappeared. In the second timeline, when he was talking to Richard McRoy on the phone while they worked at Wario's fast food factory, James vanished into thin air. Max Peterson wrote this in his diary, that he couldn't believe James was dead. He believed he was still out there somewhere. And he was correct. James vanishing was in fact Christopher teleporting him into the distant future where the timelines had merged and all hell was loose. James tried to ask what was going on, but Christopher was silent. He spoke very little, and when he did, his voice was whispering, as if he was afraid someone was listening. He told James where they were. A lab called The House with a Green Door. He told James further about the discoveries about the past. How his machine made the flow of time split into two branches, and that this James came from the second branch, the second timeline. Otherwise, Christopher didn't say much. James just observed things he did. One of them was talking into a sort of microphone connected to the time machine. He seemed to be talking to himself as he was warning Christopher about an entity named Emma. This was indeed the voice Christopher had heard while working in the old WarioWare facility. He claimed to hear his own voice echoing through the halls, and as James now witnessed, that voice came from himself from the distant future, where he tried to send a warning about an entity named Emma. It was beyond the understanding of James. Who was Emma? Not long after, James witnessed Christopher trying to send yet another voice message back in time. This time to none other than Edward Coleman. Christopher, through his archives, knew that this curse would eventually take over the world. And so he tried to warn Edward Coleman, explaining the voice Edward heard in Secure Incorporated. And just as he was talking, James saw it. For a brief second, a face, blurred in motion, swooped in. And just like that, Christopher was gone. James stood there in shock. Was this the Emma entity he had mentioned earlier? Terrified and alone, James started to go through Christopher's archives. And among tons of information about the past, he also found audio logs Christopher had left behind.
My never-ending dedication to the time travel project paid off in the end. It appears the fabric of space and time isn't exactly the way we foresaw it. This has given me a new insight into how our worlds are all connected. But this future confirms the deepest fear I had in my heart. Whatever happened back then simply continued on in a new timeline. The world is now a wasteland. My research has to continue, in a hope that I one day may return to my dearest wife, Rosalina.
Well, thank goodness she didn't marry up Mario, because bad things would happen.
According to my data, my wife kept her promise and did what I asked her to do before I left. And my hypothesis was right. The life energy of a human, or a human soul, can indeed be extracted from the physical body by my machine. Unfortunately, it appears to have made things worse. Archived phone recordings lead me to believe this curse eventually got lifted. But something must have gone wrong along the way. It's still unclear to me what this entity is, and even how much she's able to observe. But thanks to my newly developed tracker machine of undetectable matter, her existence is almost as good as confirmed. I have named it Emma. Whether or not she is connected to the collapse of Mr. McRoy and the events that followed is still unclear. Whatever she is, she may be the key to what this is all about. What do I do from here? I'm afraid the empty earth has taken a toll on me. Maybe the unseen one is the one to blame for this, where I'm just a piece in a game of chess. I fear my time is running low. Someone must take my spot. Dear James, when you hear this message, I may be gone. It's dangerous to speak in this way. I fear Emma is listening. I fear she knows what I know. I fear she knows about my knowledge of her existence. But there's no time to waste. You have probably gotten some ideas of what is going on from calling Richard every night in Wario's fast food factory. I've brought you here to help me stop whatever is happening. The technology here is exactly what it says on the tin. Use it to send a message back to yourself. She might hear this message, but that's a risk I simply have to take. You have more time than I do. Encrypt a message and return it to the past. A message she cannot decipher.
Through the audio logs and other logs Christopher left behind, James now understood. He understood a lot more about how these events were all connected. He understood more what Emma possibly was, the source of evil that had been tormenting Richard back in the factory, which evolved into the evil now roaming around outside. Christopher had told him to send a cryptic message back through his machine, back to himself from the first timeline where this all started. A message telling himself about all of this, what would happen if the curse got unleashed, and how he had to prevent Wario from ever unleashing it. But how could he do this? How could he make a message that Emma could not decrypt? He certainly remembered his hobby in game development. A video game series. A perfect way to encrypt the message. James began immediately to develop simple, short video games that tried to replicate some of the major events he had read about. And in these simple games he hid messages that he knew he, himself, would understand. These games were short, poorly drawn, and had a hint of humor, all to try to draw Emma's attention away from what he was doing. The timelines can feel confusing. Are multiple Christopher versions the same person? Is it a soul split in two? Is time in Grey City also split in two, etc.? There's a lot of details to wrap one's head around. And yes, a soul is split in two when the timeline splits in two. But time only split in the normal dimension, the main world, the created world. Grey City and the mythical, rumored world above creation are both not affected by this, and are running in their own time and speed, but all of them are running in a linear time. Time is always running in one direction. Eventually, through the natural flow of time, these two split timelines would merge back together. This James came from the second timeline, where most of our story up until now has taken place. The Christopher from the first and original timeline was the one James had just met, and the one that Emma had recently taken away. The Christopher from the second timeline, on the other hand, disappeared while doing research in Wario Incorporated, as you may remember. But was this also Emma's doing? Was it Emma that also took Christopher from Timeline 2 away? Or was it something else going on at that point?
Chapter 15. The Great Reset.
So, how are y'all doing?
Fine.
Good. We're about
James
done here.
had finished playtesting his games.
That's good.
During his playtesting, however,
I've
a
been doing
strange
fine
face
myself.
he hadn't coded kept appearing in the games. He had a deep fear that this was Emma, who showed herself in his games to toy with him, letting him know that she knew what he was doing. The games were now ready to be sent as coded files back through Christopher's time machine.
Kinda sounds like Minecraft music.
A little bit. Little bit.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Five Nights at Horror is like called warning of what happened.
I assume you're talking to one of your family members. I'll probably take that as a yes then.
He walked quickly through Christopher's lab and eventually found his machine again. On his way through the corridors, he came across more diary entries from Christopher. One ripped out page described how he had a strange feeling towards a nearby lake. A lake named Lake Emma. Christopher had felt something strange associated with this area, and his radars and equipment that had helped track down Emma in the first place were also having strange reactions towards this lake. In another entry that Christopher had written, an entry hidden away, he explains that he hadn't thought much of it before, but one day he decided to sneak out of his lab to investigate the lake. He reached the lake safely, and nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary, except for one star in the night sky that was shining more brightly than the others. This entry was directed towards James personally. Christopher continued to write that James should not continue reading the letter, because what Christopher learned during his trip to the lake could just be too much for James to comprehend. Canonically, James decided to not read on and leave Christopher's discovery to the imagination. Instead, he heads for the time machine to send the coded games back in time. As he approached the machine, however, a gust of warm wind blew across the room, and Emma appeared as if out of nowhere. James did not hesitate. He grabbed the first tools he could find in the lab. The first tools that could deal damage to someone. And it was a tool that could electroshock someone. To his surprise, as Emma tried to snatch him away, the electroshock equipment seemed to stun her, hurt her. A high-pitched screech emitted from the floating head. Was electricity the counter-weapon against the curse? This seemed to be the first true proof of just that. James continued to attack, and so did Emma. In the midst of the intense adrenaline rush, James was thinking about the tools he used, and if Christopher had left them here for this specific reason. Did he have a theory that electricity could defeat Emma? Emma got weaker and weaker, her face almost melting away, before she eventually exploded in a dark burst of energy. Everything went quiet. Not just inside the lab, but outside as well. The curse in the world was gone. And out of the darkness, Christopher emerged. He was alive, to James's surprise. They reunited and had a conversation about the events that had just happened. Christopher explained that the curse got out in a much bigger quantity and quality due to the manipulation of Bruno Gates' soul back in 2017, and that Emma and her curse was now gone forever. They finally had a conversation about death. James was afraid what would happen to him if the timelines reset back to 1 again. Would he be the same? Would he be gone? Who is he really? Christopher reassured him that death is not to be feared, and that life without little risk and mystery is no life at all. As for changing the past, why didn't Christopher do this before? Because he didn't know exactly how time worked until now, and once Emma was onto him, it was too late. Until James came along to finish his work. In the end, James went over to the machine to finally send the games back in time to himself in the past. Standing alone, Christopher's face went from happy to concerned. He thought to himself that he was glad that James didn't read his discovery at Lake Emma. What exactly did Christopher discover? Deep down in Grey City, Entity 01 felt it. He felt his powers, Emma, being destroyed. Furious, he knew what was going to happen. If events got changed in the very beginning, the entire future would be erased as they knew it. If James prevented the curse from ever getting out, all of history would change, and Entity 01's plan of escape would be destroyed completely. If James prevented the curse from ever getting out, the curse would never grow, a second timeline would never be created, Bruno's soul would never be sent to Grey City, and the curse would never take over the world. As soon as James of the past removed the book from Wario's factory, all of the events that followed would be reset. Entity 01 had to make one final plan before all of this got wiped out and returned to the beginning. He had to make one final weapon, And Bruno was that weapon. He had seen how Bruno's deep desires were connected to his family, and he had seen how unusually strong Bruno's soul was. So he tempted Bruno one last time. Using most of his powers, he could be able to implant a memory in Bruno's mind so strong that it could remain even after the time reset. And so, he made a deal with Bruno. If Bruno could come and find the book after James removed it, go through with the biggest and most dangerous ritual in a book, only available to the strongest of souls, then he promised he would make his daughter healthy once more. And Bruno, he agreed. And shortly after, everything went black. The future, all of the events that we know about, got erased. And time had officially reset. The plan of James and Christopher was a success. And we were back in 2004, one timeline, and the book was removed.
So...
I don't think that's it.
Chapter 16. Recap
Yep,
before
I
the
know.
showdown.
Yep, I knew it.
There's been a lot of information up until this point.
Yeah, no crap.
Timelines, time manipulation, curses, events, rules established. It's a lot to take in. So before we move into the final few chapters, let's back up a bit and do a quick recap. In 1988, Wario and Waluigi started Wario's Cafe and eventually built their own fast food factory. Here, Wario found an ancient book, used to worship Entity 01 in ancient times. He went through with a ritual, and that curse basically corrupted his and his friends' souls. It was a curse that activated after Bruno Gate, a thief being after the secret recipe, killed them. Their souls possessed their own dead bodies and killed Bruno Gate in revenge, and they were now seemingly forever cursed with revenge in their hearts. Christopher Peterson, a scientist working for a secret company, saw this threat and its potential, and used his own time machine experiment to send himself into the distant future, and his wife Rosalina followed a plan they had made and sent the corrupted spirits of Wario and Co. back in time. This caused a tremendous amount of energy to be unleashed, and instead of just sending the souls back to 1988, the time and space of the normal world got split in two, ripped apart, meaning all souls and people were now existing partly in Timeline 1 and partly in Timeline 2. In this new timeline, half of the spirits of Wario and Co. were cursed and roaming around freely, while the other halves were in their respectful bodies. In this timeline, Wario's cafe closed down due to the cursed spirits haunting it. Wario went on to make WarioWare Incorporated, and he bought the building of a man named Lucas. The place felt haunted, and several years later, an ancient creature resurrected by Christopher Peterson's and Lucas McCrory's company burned it down. Wario's factory was then built, and the events from Timeline 1 repeated themselves except for the ancient book ritual. After Bruno Gate killed them, their half-spirits went somewhere beyond, while the corrupted spirits from Timeline 1 took over their bodies. Bruno Gate's soul couldn't rest, and Wario and Co. stayed until the factory reopened later in 2014. Richard McRoy got a night shift job on the request of his father Lucas, and Wario and the others tried to kill him. The factory closed down. Richard had nightmares of Grey City and the Cursed Ones. WarioWare got reopened, and this time it was Thomas Taylor who got tormented by the Cursed Ones. Thomas experienced a time slip during his final night, something he didn't understand. He went to Wario's factory to investigate further his experiences and got transported to Grey City, where he got trapped seemingly forever. Edward Coleman got a job at the old McCroy house Max Peterson, Christopher's cousin, tried to help. On the final night, the curse had grown so strong they were able to teleport Edward and themselves into the cellar of Wario's factory. But it wasn't strong enough to bring a soul down to Grey City yet. So they let themselves be sent back in time by Rosalina, creating a loop so they could keep growing. On the last cycle, they tricked Bruno Gate down in the cellar using a music box, similar to the one of his daughter owned. Here the curse was detached from the souls, and Bruno was dragged down to Grey City and tormented and tortured until he was so defeated that Emma could send more of her powers into the real world through him. Emma had created separate entities of the curse, known as the viruses, and this curse and Emma as a whole kept growing stronger until the entire world was killed off many years later. In a distant future, the two timelines started to merge together, and in the year 2745, Christopher from Timeline 1 was alone in his lab, researching the curse and reality itself. He learned of Emma and some deep secret information that he claimed was too much for people to handle. He teleported James from Timeline 2 to him to assist him, and Emma took Christopher away to try to kill him. James made cryptic video games as messages that Emma hopefully wouldn't understand, but he was wrong. She came back and tried to end him too, but James defeated her and Christopher survived. The game messages were sent back to Timeline 1, where James of that timeline deciphered the message and changed history. Right before time resets due to those actions, Entity 01, the devil, made a deal with Bruno. If Bruno would unleash him into the world after the time reset, he would make his daughter healthy again. Bruno agreed, and a great time reset occurred. Since Timeline 2 was a direct result of Timeline 1, this meant that Timeline 2 was no more. Time got reset back to 2004, when Wario and Waluigi opened their fast food factory. Everything was back to the very beginning. Only two things were different. James had removed the book so Wario could not find it, and Bruno Gates still had the memory of the now non-existent future, the memory that Entity 01 planted in him.
That was a mouthful.
Wow.
Chapter 17. The Beast from Below.
God damn.
Let me tell you right now, we're in the end game, boys.
Yeah.
Good lord.
A new day in 2004. The sun was rising. Wario and Waluigi had recently opened the fast food factory, and they were already planning to hire Mario, Peach, and Luigi. The ancient book outside the factory entrance was gone. James had removed it, but Bruno had been watching. Due to Entity 01's immense powers, he remembers the deal he made from the future that no longer exists. Bruno had snatched the book for himself. He kept it in a basement of his current home for months, unsure if he really should go through with all this. After a long time, he had made his decision. His original plan was to steal Wario's secret hamburger recipe, but this plan was now changed. Before focusing on this ancient book, he wrote a letter and mailed it to Wario's factory, apologizing in advance for what he originally planned to do and what he now was about to do. He went to a dark alley early one morning when no one was around. He opened the book. He found the ritual Entity 01 had talked about. It was the very last ritual in the book. This was one that required a strong enough soul to perform, and doing so would mean selling it to the devil himself, to Entity 01. Bruno knew that this was the only chance of saving his daughter's life. He went through with the ritual, without much hesitation. Immediately after, he felt something was terribly wrong. What had Bruno Gate just done?
What have I done?
That's how he sounds like.
Oh. Holy. That's huge, bitch!
We get it. You said that a billion times.
Okay. What is this? That's Coopzilla?
An explosion could be heard from the city center.
That's
people screaming and running.
This some
car
War of
horns
the
going off
Worlds
like
type
crazy,
shit.
people panicking, and a loud, blasting roar was heard across the entire city. Entity 01 was loose in the world at last. People were falling like flies as his curse attached itself to people. One of these people were Daisy, as she was about to open her own shop for the day. It was chaos in the city. A huge building complex was utterly destroyed and instantly replaced with a building Bruno was very familiar with. A theater from Grey City, or a replica of it. A similar theater. Entity 01 was planning to trap people in this hellish torture theater to punish them. One of the people captured was none other than Richard McRoy. He was confused and terrified. As he heard the live news on the radio, the reports were eerily similar to the nightmares Richard had in the now non-existent future. News about computer viruses, news about they're everywhere. Even the same news reporter was talking. Did the curse predict this endgame somehow in his nightmares? Richard was soon captured, and he had to go through similar trials as the one Bruno went through in Grey City. Newly created viruses were attacking the unfortunate victims trapped in these hell games. Some survived, others did not. Richard was one of those who managed to escape. He ran through the streets as he saw virus creatures killing people left and right around him. As he was running in full panic, his phone started to ring. He got into an abandoned shop, closed the door and answered a call. It was Christopher Peterson.
Yes, this is Richard. Who is this? I don't know any Christopher Peterson, so I'm sorry. But this is not a good time to chat. Huh? Yes, my father did work on stuff like that, but that's all I know. He was very secretive of his work. You worked for him? Yes, I did catch him working on some science stuff that I don't know much about. Time, DNA, space, that sort of stuff. You think so? I can always take a look back in our old home. You really think his research can help us with the situation we're in? Alright, Christopher. I'll head over there straight away and see what I can find.
The two of them did not know each other, but Christopher obviously knew Richard's father, Lucas McRoy, and he told Richard that he worked for him. Back when the timeline was split in two earlier in our story, Lucas McRoy managed to live until 2014, when Richard began his job at Wario's fast food factory. Here, however, after the timeline's reset, Lucas McRoy passed very recently, only a few months after the factory was opened. Richard reached the McRoy house and entered through a hidden door in the kitchen, leading to the hidden living room that Lucas McRoy had been using as a study. a living room that only Lucas, Richard and his late mother knew about. Richard was never allowed in there as a child, but now he had no other choice but to dig up his father's deep secrets. He got a text message from Max Peterson, where he introduced himself as Christopher's cousin, and he assisted Richard in his task. As he was starting to look around for any documents, he heard the front door open up. The viruses had found him. Using the camera system that Secure Incorporated had put up, as well as hiding behind furniture and turning lights off, he managed to hide from the creatures until they eventually moved on.
Luigi.
Richard continued to search, and eventually he found documents from his father. One of the last documents he ever wrote.
I've heard that screen so many times.
Let's see. Here, we might have something. It is still my belief that there is something wrong with this world. I always found it strange that the land Wario brought for this factory was never claimed by anyone else beforehand. After researching, it's clear that there are some strange magnetic forces at hand where his factory is built. Magnetic and electrical forces, as well as unknown dark forces leaking through our radars. Something that seemed to be a polar opposite to the electrical forces. If our theory of an underworld and overworld is true, this might just be a gateway to these hypothetical destinations. I've never seen disturbances like this anywhere else before, but why here? Why was Wario allowed to build here, yet everyone else have been denied it for decades and decades?
Are we good, guys?
I fear a dark age is ahead.
Yeah.
If these dark anomalies are to be believed, its opposite force, electricity,
Fucking hell, I'm glad
might
this is
be our
almost
saviour
over.
in such a situation. I know not what we may be dealing with eventually, but something is coming. Dear Godfather, I must tell this Christopher guy about this right away.
Lucas McCroy had theories and insights into the land that Wario bought for his factory, that there was something strange with it, and something strange with the world as a whole. What other secrets did Lucas McCroy have? What other discoveries had he made? But now was not the time to get caught up in that web of secrets, Richard thought. If his father's hypothesis was to be believed, electricity was the key weapon to defeating these dark powers once and for all.
Chapter 18. Lucas McCroy has a secret.
Only 2 more left, and then we're done with this.
Entity 01 kept torturing people in his theater while he was looking for ways to reach this mythical overworld he was looking for. The paradise where he believed to have been created. He did not know that Wario's factory was a sort of strange magnetic point where these 3 worlds met. He did know before, thanks to Thomas Taylor reaching Grey City through Wario's factory, but those events are now erased, and thus he was looking around for the entrance to the overworld and where it could possibly be. And if Richard and the others didn't hurry up, Entity 01 would soon learn of this truth. The truth that Wario's factory was the place. Richard and Max planned to bring powerful electrical components over to Wario's factory. No one knew Entity 01's desires and ultimate goal, but if Lucas McCroy's theories were right in that Wario's factory had strange forces in it, it certainly would be a location Entity 01 would be interested in. Richard began by going over to the old Wario's cafe and found an electrical component in a basement cabinet. Before he left, Max asked him to bring a crowbar with him and take it to a nearby closed-off building. This building he was
sent to was the very same one that Wario turned into WarioWare Incorporated previously in our story. In this reset timeline, however, WarioWare never existed, but the previous owners who had abandoned this facility was still a man named Lucas. And as you may have guessed by now, this previous owner of this facility was Lucas McRoy. He and a specific few other people from this secret company had used this facility for very secretive research in the 1980s. And they quickly abandoned the facility in 1986. Why exactly? Something happened there. This was even before the timeline split in two, meaning that whatever they did affected both timelines when that was still a thing. So what did it do? What made them leave so suddenly? As you may have picked up, there has always been something strange with this place. Bowser burning it down, Thomas Taylor experiencing a time slip. Have you ever wondered why these things happened? In 1986, Lucas McRoy and a few other scientists high up in the system discovered something while doing research and experiments in this building. They managed to open a rift in space. A rift to where exactly? Grey City? The heavenly overworld above creation? No, this rift led somewhere else. And they all felt this was not right. They all felt they were tampering with something they should have left alone. They tampered with the very structure of the nature of this world. And through this rift, something started to emerge. Something horrifying. In panic, they tried to close off this rift and succeeded. Partly, at least. They abandoned the facility shortly after. In the first timeline, and in this now currently reset timeline, the facility had remained empty ever since then. But in the now non-existent second timeline, where most of our story took place, Wario bought this facility and started WarioWare Incorporated in 1990. His claims that the building felt haunted, as you may remember, came from this very experiment that Lucas had initiated years prior. When Lucas and his scientists heard about this rumor that the place felt haunted even 4 years after their experiment, they feared their discovery was not gone after all. They did not know what this could imply, but they knew that this was not something to take lightly. They feared that whatever they had almost let into this world through the rifts they discovered may have just slipped in after all, at least somewhat. To try and cover their tracks and destroy this haunting discovery once and for all, they used their latest experiment, the resurrected Bowser creature, to burn down WarioWare Incorporated. The building burning down was indeed on Lucas McRoy's orders. They wanted to cover up and destroy this being they had encountered and potentially let into this world through this rift they created. But did this work? Did burning down WarioWare Incorporated really get rid of it? Many years later in this destroyed timeline, in 2016, Thomas Taylor was working there after the grand reopening, as you may remember. But on the last night, he experienced a time slip, jumping from October 2016 to May 2017 in the span of one night. The creature that Lucas McRoy had let into this world so many years ago was still not gone. Not fully, even after the fire. Yet it was not fully present either. But its powers, its presence, it caused a disturbance in the flow of time in the building. This entity, whatever it was, did not belong in this world, and thus it caused Thomas Taylor to jump forward in time. The question remains, what was this entity that Lucas encountered? that he let through the rift they created? And where exactly did it end up after they tried to close the rift off? We're now back in the present, after the timelines reset back into one, after Entity 01 escaped into the real world in 2004. After acquiring a power component and a crowbar from the old Wario's cafe, Richard was on his way to this old facility to grab a powerful power generator that Max knew about. And they were planning to bring it all over to Wario's factory later, to defeat Entity 01 for good, should he appear there. Richard broke into the facility. Everything was quiet, as expected. Only a few things remained after his father and his team used this place almost 20 years ago. Among those was a power generator in the back room. Richard went back there and pulled it down with his crowbar. He picked it up and he dragged the big generator into the main office. As he did so, he felt a strange vibration. The room itself was not shaking, yet it felt like it was. Suddenly, a feeling of being pulled into a vortex. It lasted only a few seconds before all vibrations stopped, and Richard was back in the main office again. Only things were different. Very different. The outside was pitch black. Not black as in a night sky, but even darker. Richard had never seen something so empty before. The office was red, twisted, almost like a distorted painting. What was happening? Silence filled the surroundings. But someone or something was in there with Richard. He could feel it. Richard tried to escape, but it did not work. It was almost like the walls themselves represented the edge of the world, with a huge void beyond it. After being stuck there for a while, frustrated and scared, he saw the entity he had felt before. It was standing in a hallway next to the main office. It was Mario, only not exactly. He had multiple legs, a distorted face and a distorted body as a whole. Richard was just staring at it. This was it. This was the entity that Lucas McRoy had accidentally let into the world back in 1986.
Damn, that's freaky.
This entity was what they tried to cover up. This was the entity that took Christopher away when he was doing research in WarioWare Incorporated. This is the entity that caused Thomas Taylor to experience an error in time. So where was this taking place? Where or what was this location? When Lucas and his team tried to close off this mysterious rift to prevent this Mario-like entity to come through, they managed to trap him in an in-between place, a pocket dimension. A small alternate universe created by this breaking of the natural laws. This pocket dimension took the form of the very same facility it almost escaped into, only warped and twisted. Somehow Richard got pulled into this pocket reality and came face to face with a being that resided there. This is exactly what happened to Christopher as well. When he disappeared from WarioWare Incorporated earlier in the story, he ended up in this strange place. But what was this being? This Mario creature? Where exactly did it come from? Richard experienced what could only be described as the end of a fever dream as he suddenly found himself back in the main world once more. Confused and shocked, his phone immediately received a text message from Max. Max said he had lost Richard's phone signal, and that he should get out of there at once. Richard remembered the important task at hand, and immediately started his journey towards Wario's fast food factory.
Chapter 19. Devil Showdown.
We're in the end game, boys.
The true
Richard reached the factory. He broke in and went into the control room where most electric circuits were wired up and where most of the factory's electronics were controlled from. He wired up the powerful electronics which allowed antenna-like components on the factory's roof to emit overcharges. His work was now done. Finished. Now they just had to wait for the devil himself to show up. Before he could think another thought, he fell. The floor under him collapsed, and he fell through an incredibly deep hole in the ground. Screaming as he thought he would die any second, he finally landed in a deep pool of water. As he got out, he took a few moments to catch his breath before taking in his surroundings. He was in a cave, deep underground, far deeper down than the cellar tunnels of the factory. He pulled out a pocket flashlight he had on him and started to walk around. As he explored, he swore he could hear faint, distant laughs coming from deep within the cave. He quickly realized that these were carefully handcrafted tunnels made by man. He walked further through the tunnels, getting more and more anxious and stressed as time went on. And in one tunnel in particular, he could feel a very strange smell and a strange vibe and feeling overall. He instantly knew this was something dangerous. Radiation? A gas of some sort? He was not sure, but he quickly turned around and went back. In a big room he arrived at, he found a gas mask. An old gas mask on the floor. It had an old, rotten smell, but it would protect him. He could see carvings and drawings on the floor, walls, and ceiling. One of these carvings and drawings represented the head of a horned beast. It was the head of Entity 01. He eventually found what seemed to be a staircase leading far up. It had to be an exit. As he started to walk, the faint laughter from before exploded in intensity right behind his head. And Richard ran as fast as he could. The laughs faded away as he got further up, and he reached the top, only to find that it was only a pile of dirt above him that separated the caverns from the surface. As he dug through it, sunlight hit his face, and he felt safe once more. At least for a little while. He looked around him, and in the distance he could see the factory as well as the huge, massive silhouette of Entity 01 approaching the factory. What did he just stumble upon and fall into? He thought to himself. He had in fact stumbled upon a cave of an ancient witch coven who used to worship the ritual book and Entity 01. The mysterious coven was long gone, but their evil presence was still hanging around in the cave walls. As weird as this day had been, this was no time to think. He contacted Wario, the owner of the factory, and told him about the electrical components that were put in place. Wario was nervous, as this was happening at his factory. He felt some sort of responsibility to fix all of this, although he did not understand what exactly was happening. Wario reached the factory. Entity 01 had already arrived. If he found the entrance to the mythical overworld, who knows what catastrophe could happen? Wario immediately took hold of remotes and cables that were wired up outside and started to overcharge them. Entity 01 understood what Wario was trying to do, and so he sent counterattacks, hoping to straight up kill him. But as the factory overcharged and sent electroshocks out, Entity 01 flinched and screamed as the entire sky seemingly lit up by the overcharges. Entity 01 took damage. And so Wario continued, now with a tiny bit of confidence built up, and Entity 01 continued with failed counterattacks. Eventually, dark energy started to leak out of the devil. Wario understood that this was no longer a power that was under the control of the beast, and so he was able to absorb it and use it against the beast. A sort of soul power, if you will, combined with electricity.
They just changed the
Wario was
render?
winning. As the battle went on, Entity 01 grew more and more distorted, weaker and weaker,
Imagine if
until the
this was a
final
brawl
scream
mod,
could be
though.
heard across the entire city.
Like, seriously, NTL 1 would actually make a good Super Smash Bros. Brawl boss mod.
Wario stood there, shaking and exhausted, and was still smiling from ear to ear as he saw the devil in front of him being vaporized for good. As Entity 01 was
What a hero.
fading away from existence in a white purplish light, his final words came through. His dying voice told Wario that they had no idea what they had just done, and that they had no idea what they could have accomplished together. With his final words being, "I was so close." He exploded, and with that, his theater, Emma, and all the viruses dissolved into nothing. The curse was truly defeated for good. A silence filled the air. Waluigi, Mario, and Luigi approached Wario, who had been watching from a distance.
It's over.
Ooh, animated.
The creatures are gone. The silence has returned.
Oh yeah, this is a different model of Luigi.
Whatever, for all of this, somehow deep within, I felt formerly at home. This letter was in the factory mailbox today. Please forgive me what I've done. It's what I am, felt to do. Please who is Bruno Gate? Did he cause this? Where is he now?
That's actually a good Waluigi impression.
If so, it truly shows what desperation does to a man. I share a similar problem. The factory isn't going to win, but let's stay true to the vision, to the secret recipe. After all, what happens, happens.
Wario had finally learned. The greed, the reason for all of this starting in the first place, was no more. If the factory went bankrupt, then he just had to accept that. He now understood that He couldn't fix anything with magic. He had to simply believe in what made his product unique and let everything else play out. And they all agreed. But Mario's thoughts were elsewhere. Where was Peach? Surely she was hiding somewhere, right? Despite being the ultimate evil, Entity 01 kept his promise. Eve, Bruno Gates' daughter, was healthy once more. Bruno's ultimate goal was achieved at last. But where was Bruno himself? Did he die with Entity 01 that he had sold his soul to? Or was he now free somewhere and was on his way to see his daughter again? That answer is for you to decide. Everything was seemingly back to normal. The evil that had always resided below creation was destroyed by the man who originally let it all loose. Peace was returned. The factory was struggling once again, but Wario kept his confidence up this time. One day, after a long day, he was carrying boxes downstairs into the cellar. And something strange caught his attention. At the end of the room, a bright yellow light was shining brightly. Wario looked at it with curiosity. There were no lamps or other light sources around to create it. He put the boxes down and went over to this light, and he tried to touch it. The stone floor beneath his feet disappeared. The smell of the old cellar was no more, and white light filled his entire vision before what could only be described as a hallucination or a fever dream or a huge revelation occurred.
Oh my god!
Damn.
Oh, oh, ah, ah!
Wario woke up. All around him, he saw fields of grass. Wario had just found the realm above creation, the place Entity 01 was searching for. The overworld. The massive overcharges at the factory had opened a rift to this heavenly realm. And now, Wario was there. Only something was wrong. This was not a heavenly paradise. This was not a place of endless gardens and roses and golden statues. The grass was dark and gloomy. The sky was misty and grey. In the distance were tall, soulless buildings floating upside down. He began walking around throughout this strange landscape and found his surroundings to confuse and disturb him more and more. Light was distorted in several areas. Doors were standing in the middle of fields. Buildings were stacked on top of each other with nothing in them. Seemingly familiar faces faded in and out of his vision. What was this place? There were no people around. The place felt soulless and completely empty of life. He eventually reached a wooden hut that had letters written in ancient runes on the wall. Wario looked inside and, to his absolute shock, he saw himself. Multiple versions of himself, only they were lifeless, like a costume. Some finished, others half-made. He felt a deep sense of uneasiness. He felt like he stumbled across something that he was not meant to see.
And there's a lot of Brawl Wario right
He quickly closed the door and kept going, only to find more huts around. One of them had a glowing light inside it, similar to the one he found in his factory. As he approached this light, rapid visions filled his eyes. Visions of multiple Earths, multiple Warios, copies, parallels and the like. In the hut next to it was a strange metallic equipment that looked like a massive battery with a weird symbol on it that seemed to represent a circle with a strange lightning bolt going through it. Floating above this battery in the darkness were tons and tons of eyeballs, fading in and out of view.
Oh, God.
Which all sent electricity down to the battery. Wario started to believe he was dreaming. He kept going through this surreal landscape, and he came across one final hut. The land behind the hut seemed to go on forever with no end, and so he thought this was the place to find answers or perhaps even leave this place. The hut had a red glow coming from one of its windows. And on the wall outside was the same strange circle symbol that was present on the battery he saw earlier. As he approached the entrance, he saw more ancient runes carved into the wall. He did not understand them. Perhaps someone was inside. And so, all that he could do was to knock on the door.
Hello?
Oh, God.
Oh, there was binary there. I hardly even know.
I had
Final chapter. Revelations.
Yes, I translated it, and I forget what it translates to. Hang on, let me pull it up.
We can do that later. Final chapter. Let's see what this is
Confused? If so, that's not really a surprise. What happened at the end exactly? Is the story over, or is there something we have overlooked? Something we have missed? A key? At the very beginning, I talked about how it was strange how a dark, deep story had Mario characters thrown in, and that a reason for it did in fact exist. What did I mean by that? What happened to Wario in the end, and what does the weird circle symbol represent? Why is the devil named Entity 01? There are big questions left to be answered in order to unlock the final piece of the puzzle. In the game 5 shows at Wario's director's cut, the final achievement is unlocked when Wario tries to enter the final cabin in the overworld. The description of the achievement? Locate Entity 0. Who or what is Entity 0? Let's take a step back. What is a constant in the Five Nights at Wario's games? What is an important element in all of them, in one form or another? Electricity. Lightning and the sound of power generators setting enemies off in Final Fantasy Warriors 2. Creating electrical noises to push Wario away in Final Fantasy Warriors 3's bedroom 2. James using electrical components to defeat Emma in Final Fantasy Warriors 4. Electroshocks pushing the enemies away in 5 shows at Wario's. The list goes on. The biggest quality of electricity is, of course, being the weapon of choice against the curse. Is there a reason for this? Before facing off with Emma, James came across a note from Christopher, remember? When he said he made a discovery so huge that James probably wouldn't be able to handle it. Canonically, James chose not to read it, but in Final Fantasy Warriors 4 we can choose to see what would have happened if James had read on. We never get to know what exactly this truth was, what exactly was written in the letter. But the reaction from James gives us the impression that Christopher was right. James was not able to comprehend the information he read.
You thought that was seizure-inducing, or awkward, or weird, or whatever? Get a load of this!
Uh-oh.
Jesus.
Oh yeah, while we're here, that binary text translates to "You are forbidden to know my electrical conductor." That's what that binary text translates to right at the end of chapter 19.
Oh.
Hey look, it's that weird symbol again.
Oh yeah.
The one with the Wario like symbol. This is getting weird. Very funny.
And by the way, after that happens, the game crashes.
While we seem to know all the events in the story by this point, we do not know all the details of what Christopher discovered. But the ultimate truth has been hinted at in Final Fantasy Warriors 4 all along. Entity 01's goal, his endgame, was to reach the overworld. And why is that? Because he believed that this was the place he was created, his origin. And why would he want to know that? Because he did not know his purpose. Why does he exist as an all-powerful devil? There had to be a reason for him existing in this way. So if he got created in the overworld, that must imply there is a creator. Entity 01, the first entity ever made. So who made the first one? The creator made the first one. Entity 0 is the creator. You can call it the god of this universe if you like. What exactly Entity 0 is, if it's a human, a god, man, woman, a creature, or something beyond our comprehension and imagination, is impossible to say. And we will never know the answer. It is not a representation of me, the creator of the story. It is indeed a character in this story. The main creator of this universe.
And again, he voices a character in the
The final hut Wario tries to enter in the overworld is where Entity 0 resides. And neither we nor Wario were allowed to see inside. We were not allowed to see what Entity 0 is, because our minds would not be able to understand it. Yet getting to this place was the devil's goal. The reason for his curse book existing in the first place. The reason for all of this madness happening. It was all a plot to try and reach back to what he imagined as a heavenly paradise. But as it turned out, it wasn't so heavenly after all. Instead, it was a strange, surreal, mysterious, otherworldly place. So if the devil had a goal of getting back to his creator, a goal of understanding who and what he is, did the creator himself have a goal? This is where the big secrets come in. Entity 0's goal was, and still is, survival. It's never told to you directly because you not knowing is part of how it survives. How does Entity 0 survive? Electricity. What was the big battery in one of the huts in the overworld? The one that had the floating eyeballs above it? When you, the player, have this world open by playing the Five Nights at Wario's games, you use electricity. The eyeballs are you, the player, giving life to Entity 0 by playing its story, its world, its universe, its creation. Why does this story have colorful Mario characters as protagonists? How else would the world attract players? How else would the story get noticed and kept alive if it wasn't for the cheap trick of using some of the most familiar faces in video game history? Entity 0 represents this game universe as a whole, and both run on electricity to stay alive. How did it get people, players, to have its world open and running? By creating a storyline, creating conflict, writing out the script and rules of this universe, and setting it in motion. No story is without conflict. Conflict is the main source of an engaging story. It's what creates friction and a reason to keep following, in the hope that some form of change and evolution will occur. The first entity to be created in this universe was the representation of conflict and desire itself. Entity 01, the devil.
Jump scare.
What is Entity 01's powers called in this electrical digital world? Virus. His curse is literally a computer virus, the opposite force of electricity. It is the very cause of conflict, and thus part of the very source of Entity 0's life in this world. The very reason the first Five Nights at Wario's game and all of the following ones have any gameplay at all is because of the curse creating conflict. After the devil was made, it obviously needed an opposite to counter it. Wario. Wario is the name and the face of this franchise, and so Wario is literally the main conductor of electricity, the main opposite force of the computer virus. What is Wario's main icon, and what most people associate with him visually? His mustache, formed as a lightning bolt. And what symbol is seen outside of Entity 0's hut? A circle, with a lightning bolt, Wario's mustache, going through it. This is the symbol of Entity Zero, and it's a visual message saying that this is a world, a planet, running on electricity. Wario's electricity. There's a reason electricity is what causes the fabric of this world to break open, leading to Grey City and the overworld, as well as the mysterious place this strange Mario apparition came from that Lucas McCroy discovered. The world is built with electricity. If it gets overcharged, the world itself breaks. Ever wondered why it's called Five Nights at Wario's, even though we're not always present in a Wario facility? Because this isn't just about Wario's companies. We are playing Five Nights at Wario's. 5 nights in Wario's world, Wario's universe. 5 nights in the story about Wario, the main attraction and thus the main conductor of electricity, which keeps the game's Entity Zero god alive. Wario was the only one allowed to build his factory on the specific piece of land, because that's one of the core settings for this world that Entity Zero made as he created the world. Wario had to be the one building his factory there because this is where the 3 worlds meet, where the ancient witch coven would reside, and where core elements of the story would take place. Five Nights at Wario's 4 told us this in a sequence with James reading Christopher's letter. It told us that this is a world running on electricity. A digital world, where nothing is ultimately real. This is what Christopher discovered, that he believed no one would be able to comprehend. They were all part of a digital story. They are merely pieces of code, roaming around with seemingly free will. The huts with many unfinished Warios in the overworld, it's a storage. It was the first testing chamber, the prototypes for the story's upcoming main weapon and protagonist. If Entity Zero created Wario as its main electrical weapon and producer, what did the opposite force create? Entity 01 created Emma, or Demon Wario, the anti-Wario. This is a story about the creator of electricity versus the creator of computer virus, each having their sentient front figure, Wario and Emma. The Demon Wario form exists to show that this is Wario's exact opposite. This is a story about greed and desire, about acceptance and letting go. The main antagonist's motivation is driven by desire. To know where it originated from, to know the truth, to receive the great revelation. In that way, you can start to ask the question, who is the real villain here? Is the devil, Entity 01, just one of the victims put onto a chessboard that he never wanted to be part of? Or did he really choose to be the way he did, to inflict all the pain and suffering? Is Entity Zero a villain or a hero? Good or evil? Can the characters in the story feel true pain if they are merely code? And what does that say about the god of this world? It put together a concept, a villain and a hero, a man and a beast, gave the characters of the story free will and the ability to feel pain and emotion, set it all in motion in one big bang, and let go of the steering wheel, letting the story happen the way it wanted to. Did anything happen off script? Was Wario supposed to find the overworld? Was that part of the plan, making the players excited and interested to know what happened to him next, resulting in me making this video which makes people go back to the games, all to keep itself alive? Or was Wario going off the planned tracks? It's impossible to say, because describing who or what Entity Zero is impossible. Five Nights at Wario's is a story but also an entity in itself. The original one who created it all inside of the universe. What it is impossible to describe. It doesn't have a form anyone can explain. It runs on players giving it electricity by having its world open on their computers. And through giving the main antagonist a deep desire, conflicts occurs and a story is made, keeping players at bay and keeping itself alive. If no one plays, if no one has any of the games open anymore, no electricity is given to this world, and Entity Zero dies. Which is why I cannot give out all the answers. Questions like what the ancient creature of Bowser actually was are questions you just have to dwell on yourself. The story, Entity Zero, cannot reveal every secret. If the mystery is over, so is the story. So you may have two burning questions at this point. What happened to Wario after knocking on the director's door? And what was the mysterious Mario entity that Lucas McRoy led into our world, and where did it come from? Unfortunately, for now, these are questions you just have to give an answer to yourself. This marks the end of an era of Five Nights at Wario's. The evil of the story is defeated, but what truly was the real villain is up to you to decide. A few questions remain unanswered, but that's how it's supposed to be. Knowing absolutely everything is never part of the fun. Will the story ever continue? At the moment, it's impossible to say. But the series of games, Five Nights at Wario's, has come to a close. And this marks the end of its main story. Thank you for watching, and thank you for playing.
Wow.
Wow.
Jeez, that was a lot to take in.
That was so long.
Oh, wait.
There's an after credits. Is there?
Huh.
Nope. Not really.
Damn, that was it.
And that's it.
Well.
Jeez, Jason, do you mind if I take the honor system?
What?
Normally you just do your ending thing, but I kind of want to do this time.
Oh, I think I got a better idea for this.
Don't kill
But-
us. Actually, I have
Wario died from a nosy god!
Idiot! Oh, I guess I don't.
Ah, fucker, you didn't get me that time.
Oh my god.
Jesus, 3 hours. That almost felt like 7. Almost felt like 7 or something.
Unbelievable.
Honestly, I may not be.
Oh, dang.
I may not be too big into Financial Wars, but damn, that was a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's a punishment for me for not having PvP off. Seriously, where do you even put your ray? Seriously, where do you even store your ray gun to begin with?
Bite me.
Okay.
Wait.
Okay, let's have
a
apple bobbing contest.
Oh god.
You're welcome.
Anyway.
Okay, yeah,
what were you gonna say for the outro, or was that it?
I got.
Well, basically, my expectations for this entire quote-unquote storyline, honestly, I didn't expect it to be this deep for a silly little Mario X FNAF fan game.
Damn
But
right.
to be honest, it was a lot deeper than what I expected. Like,
I gotta be
honestly.
honest though, the lore is pretty damn insane. I mean,
Yeah,
the NTO1 becoming like a giant like Godzilla. I mean, seriously.
I think he was already a giant big guy to begin with.
I mean,
Honestly,
that's like,
this is a good example for like modern FNAF-ish storylines, and I wish more things could be like this. WWW Wario pretty much perfected this in some sort of way, and I kind of want to see more of this.
yeah, me too.
I was just, well, I mean, I mean, this is probably the best fan fiction I've ever seen.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
this is probably the best fan fiction I've ever seen. Requiem for a Loud, Eat Your Heart Out.
we don't talk about that. But yeah, all of this bullshit aside, yeah, I guess that's it.
Yes,
we
we
have
do.
to.
Ow, you dick!
Yes, we do.
Ow!
You were meant to kill.
Well, we all died. So I guess that's it. So
one of my complaint is, why was Entity 01 a Bowser design necessary for Entity 01? It was doing a fine job sticking away from series cliches, and then Entity 01 just is based off Giga Bowser.
Honestly, I can imagine NTO1 as a brawl mod.
That would be a pretty interesting skin for Giga
Yeah,
Bowser.
it would really be a really cool skin.
But yeah, I guess that's it. So
yeah, whoever is a brawl modder, do yourself a favor and actually make NTO1 skin.
don't actually do that. We want you to save your time.
What? It's their own free. What? They can do whatever the heck they want. About.
I'm still alive, jackass. Plus, I got Vegas. So, yeah, I guess that's everything. So,
yeah.
Yeah, we're obviously gonna link our stuff.
Oh, hi,
and shit.
Hi.
Yeah, so we're obviously gonna link our shit down in the comments. So, yeah. We hope you really enjoyed this 3-hour cringe fest. But
Probably
hey,
over 3 hours, but regardless.
3 damn hours.
Whatever, it was 3 hours in
for
total.
Watching. I'll leave both videos in the description. You want to watch those on your own time. Until then, take care.
Damn it, I wanted to say something else.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, wait, I remember now. Don't forget to eat pumpkin pie. That's it.
And so with that, thank you guys for watching. Comment, like,
Cliche,
and subscribe.
cliche plain
We'll
rock
see you guys
outro.
later. Bye.
Cliche.
Well, I forgot the lighting. Anyway, we'll see you now later.